On October 21st, 1934, a 10-year-old girl walked into a Manhattan courtroom wearing a velvet dress chosen by someone else. Gloria Vanderbilt had been summoned to testify in her own custody trial, a legal battle between her mother and her aunt over who would control her, and more precisely, who would control the trust fund attached to her. The courtroom fell silent as she took the stand. Reporters leaned forward. Photographers were forbidden, but they waited outside. She answered questions about her mother in a voice described as barely audible. When asked if she wanted to live with her mother, she said no. The newspapers called it the trial of the century. They called her the poor little rich girl. She was worth $4 million. She had no choice in being there. The trial would determine where she lived, but the question of what she wanted, actually wanted, never entered the proceedings. The judge's decision came 3 weeks later. Gloria would live with her aunt. Her mother would see her on weekends and some holidays, under supervision. When the verdict was read, Gloria was already gone. Someone had taken her out a side door. This is where the story begins, but not where the damage started. Gloria Laura Vanderbilt was born on February 20th, 1924, in a townhouse on East 67th Street in Manhattan. Her father, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, was 43 years old and dying, though no one used that word yet. He had been drinking heavily for years. His liver was failing. The family fortune, built by his grandfather Cornelius Vanderbilt through railroads and shipping, had already begun its diffusion through generations of heirs who spent but did not build. Reginald had inherited millions. He had also inherited the expectation that the money would simply continue, that wealth of that magnitude was self-perpetuating. It was not. Gloria's mother, Gloria Morgan, was 19 years old, beautiful and considered by the Vanderbilt family to be an unsuitable match. She had been born in Switzerland to a diplomat father and had spent her youth moving between Europe and New York. The Vanderbilts viewed her as foreign, flighty, more interested in parties than propriety. Reginald had married her anyway, in 1923, while legally still married to his first wife. The divorce had not yet been finalized. The wedding took place quietly. The family did not attend. When Gloria was born, her father held her once. Photographs from that day show a man whose face had begun to blur at the edges, skin loose and grayish. He looked at the camera, not at the infant in his arms. 3 weeks later, he was hospitalized. The official cause was cirrhosis, but the word used in private was simpler. He drank himself to death. By the time Gloria was 18 months old, Reginald Vanderbilt was dead. She would have no memory of him. What she inherited was not a father, but a financial instrument, a trust fund worth approximately $4 million, managed by the Guarantee Trust Company and her father's executors. The money came with stipulations. Gloria's mother would receive an allowance for the child's care, $48,000 per year. It was a substantial sum, but for a woman who had married into Vanderbilt wealth expecting an open vault, it felt like rationing. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt took her daughter and left New York. They moved to Paris, where the cost of living was lower and where the allowance could stretch further. Gloria's mother rented apartments, hired nurses, and resumed the life she had been living before marriage. Parties, travel, socializing with aristocrats and artists, and anyone who made life feel less constricting. The child was there, always nearby, attended to by staff, but her mother was often elsewhere. In photographs from those years, young Gloria appears in the background of images centered on her mother, sitting on a nurse's lap at a cafe terrace while her mother leans toward a companion, standing beside a doorway while her mother descends a staircase in evening clothes. The trust paid for everything, but the trustees watched every expenditure. They questioned bills for clothing, travel, servants. They asked why Gloria Morgan needed to stay in expensive hotels, why she required a lady's maid, why she took extended trips to Biarritz and Cannes. Gloria Morgan responded with indignation. She was raising a Vanderbilt. Did they expect her to live modestly? The tension grew. The trustees began to reduce the allowance, citing unnecessary expenses. Gloria Morgan accused them of cruelty. She wrote letters insisting that she needed more for the child's welfare. The child, meanwhile, spent much of her time with a nurse named Emma Keislich, a stern German woman who enforced rigid schedules and rarely smiled. In 1932, when Gloria was 8 years old, her mother sent her to live temporarily with her paternal aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, at her estate in Old Westbury, Long Island. The stated reason was that Gloria's mother needed to travel to Europe for health reasons. The actual reason was financial desperation. Gloria Morgan could not afford to maintain their lifestyle and care for her daughter simultaneously. Gertrude Whitney, a sculptor and philanthropist who had founded the Whitney Museum of American Art, agreed to take the child. She had money of her own, an inheritance from her father and her marriage to Harry Payne Whitney. She also had strong opinions about how children should be raised. Gloria arrived at the Whitney estate with a single suitcase. Her mother left for Europe the next day. What began as a temporary arrangement became something else. Weeks turned into months. Gloria's mother remained in Europe, sending letters, but not returning. Gertrude Whitney observed the child, thin, quiet, obedient to the point of erasure. She watched how Gloria flinched when voices were raised, how she asked permission before speaking, how she seemed to anticipate punishment for infractions she had not committed. Gertrude began to wonder what kind of care the child had been receiving. She wrote to the trustees, she wrote to family members, she began to gather information. In 1933, Gloria's mother finally returned to New York. She expected to collect her daughter and resume their life together. Gertrude refused to return the child. She filed for custody. The grounds: neglect, immorality, unfitness as a mother. Gloria Morgan was accused of leaving her daughter for extended periods, of exposing her to inappropriate adult company, of spending the trust money on herself rather than the child. The accusations were detailed and specific. Servants were prepared to testify. Nurses had kept records. Letters had been saved. Gloria Morgan fought back. She hired lawyers. She called the accusations lies, motivated by Gertrude's desire to control the Vanderbilt money. She said that Gertrude, who had her own wealth, wanted to absorb Gloria into the Whitney family, to erase the Morgan side entirely. She accused Gertrude of stealing her daughter. The case went to court. It became public. Newspapers published daily updates. Reporters waited outside both women's homes. The details were lurid. Testimony about Gloria Morgan's relationship with a married German prince, about parties that lasted until dawn, about the child being left with servants while her mother traveled. Gloria Morgan's lawyer argued that wealthy women had always employed nurses and governesses, that there was nothing unusual about her lifestyle. Gertrude's lawyers argued that Gloria had been treated not as a daughter, but as an accessory, present when convenient, dismissed when not. And then Gloria herself was called to testify. She was 10 years old. She wore the velvet dress. She sat in the witness chair. She was asked if she loved her mother. She said yes. She was asked if she wanted to live with her mother. She said no. The courtroom grew louder. The judge called for order. Gloria's mother wept in her seat. Gertrude Whitney sat motionless. Gloria was escorted out through a side door before the cross-examination could continue. The trial lasted 6 weeks. On November 21st, 1934, the judge ruled in favor of Gertrude Whitney. Gloria would live with her aunt. Her mother would have limited visitation. The money would remain under the trustees' control. Gloria did not return to the Whitney estate immediately. She was taken instead to a separate residence, away from reporters, away from both her mother and her aunt, while arrangements were made. She stayed in a borrowed house with a nurse she did not know. No one explained what would happen next. No one asked what she wanted. The legal matter had been settled. The child had been assigned. The trial had already been underway for 2 weeks before Gloria was brought into the courtroom. Justice John Francis Carew presided. The proceedings took place in New York Supreme Court, but the atmosphere resembled theater more than law. Every morning, crowds gathered outside. Women in furs pressed against barricades. Photographers jostled for position. Inside, the courtroom filled within minutes. Socialites, journalists, curious spectators who had read the morning headlines and wanted to witness the spectacle firsthand. They came to see Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt defend herself. They came to see Gertrude Whitney maintain her composure. They came because wealth, when forced into public view, became entertainment. The testimony began with nurses. Emma Keislich took the stand first. She had cared for Gloria from infancy until the child was 7. She spoke in heavily accented English, describing years spent in Paris apartments and European hotels. She detailed Gloria Morgan's schedule: late mornings, afternoons spent at cafes, evenings that stretched past midnight. She described how the child was often left alone with staff, how her mother would leave for days or weeks at a time without clear itineraries. She mentioned parties where men stayed late, where voices carried through thin walls, where the child was sometimes present until she was finally taken to bed. Under cross-examination, Gloria Morgan's attorney attempted to discredit Kaslich. Had she not been fired? Yes. Had she not harbored resentment? Perhaps. But the details she provided were specific: dates, locations, names. She produced a diary she had kept throughout her employment. The entries were brief but damning. Madame returned at 4 a.m. Child cried for her mother. No word from Madame for 6 days. The diary was admitted as evidence. Other servants followed. A chauffeur testified about driving Gloria Morgan to parties and not returning for her until dawn. A hotel manager described unpaid bills and complaints from other guests about noise. A lady's maid spoke about packing for trips to Cannes and Biarritz, where the child was left behind in Paris. Each witness added another layer. The portrait that emerged was not of cruelty, exactly, but of absence. Gloria Morgan had not harmed her daughter through violence. She had harmed her through indifference, through treating the child as an obligation that could be delegated, deferred, managed by others. Gloria Morgan took the stand on the third week. She wore black, which her lawyer had advised. She spoke carefully, insisting that everything she had done was for her daughter's benefit. The parties she attended were social necessities. A widow needed to maintain connections. The trips she took were for her health. Doctors had recommended warmer climates. The servants were employed to provide the best care. What mother could be with her child every moment? She cried twice during her testimony. The first time when asked about her late husband. The second when shown a photograph of Gloria as an infant. The tears seemed genuine, but they did not address the question beneath every line of questioning. Where had she been? The most damaging testimony came from a woman named Consuelo Thaw, Gloria Morgan's twin sister. Consuelo had been close to her sister, had traveled with her, had been present during many of the years in question. She took the stand reluctantly. She confirmed that Gloria Morgan had been involved with Prince Friedel Hohenlohe of Waldenburg, Schillingsfürst, a married man. She confirmed parties, late nights, extended absences. She described finding young Gloria alone in a hotel room in Paris, feverish, with no adult present except a maid who spoke no English. When asked why she had not intervened, Consuelo said she had assumed her sister knew best. When asked if she believed her sister was a fit mother, Consuelo hesitated. Then she said, "I think she tried." Gertrude Whitney's testimony was brief and controlled. She stated that she had taken Gloria into her home at her sister-in-law's request. She stated that the arrangement was meant to be temporary. She stated that as weeks became months, she grew concerned. She had observed the child's fear, her excessive obedience, her reluctance to speak unless spoken to. She had consulted physicians who noted Gloria's underweight condition and nervous disposition. She had decided that returning the child to her mother would constitute harm. When asked if she wanted custody because of the trust fund, Gertrude's response was cold. "I have my own money." The courtroom sessions lasted 6 hours each day. Newspapers printed transcripts. The case was discussed in parlors and at dinner tables across the country. Editorial writers opined about modern motherhood, about the responsibilities of wealth, about the corruption of the upper class. Some defended Gloria Morgan as a young widow navigating impossible circumstances. Others condemned her as selfish and neglectful. The child at the center of the trial was rarely mentioned except as evidence, as the object being fought over. What she wanted, what she felt, remained unexamined until the day she was called to testify. Gloria was brought to the courthouse on November 6, 1934. She had been prepared by lawyers, but not by anyone who asked how she felt about what was happening. She wore a navy velvet dress with a white collar. Her hair had been curled. She looked, according to one reporter, like a doll placed on a shelf. She was led into the courtroom through a private entrance to avoid the crowds. She did not look at her mother as she passed. She was sworn in. She sat in the witness chair, her feet not reaching the floor. Justice Carew asked the questions himself. His tone was gentle, But the questions were not. Did she love her mother? Yes. Did she miss her mother? Sometimes. Did she want to live with her mother? The courtroom went silent. Gloria looked down at her hands. She said no. The word was quiet, but clear. Reporters wrote it down. Gloria Morgan made a sound, not quite a sob, something smaller and more wounded. Gertrude Whitney did not move. Justice Carew asked Gloria to explain. She said she liked living with Aunt Gertrude. She said Aunt Gertrude's house was nice. She said nothing about her mother's care, about Paris, about being left alone. She simply said she wanted to stay where she was. The cross-examination began. Gloria Morgan's attorney approached the child with a softer voice. He asked if anyone had told her what to say. She said no. He asked if she had been frightened living with her mother. She said no. He asked if she remembered being happy with her mother. She said yes. He asked again if she wanted to live with her mother. She said no. He asked why. She did not answer. Justice Carew intervened. He asked if the child was tired. She nodded. He dismissed her from the stand. She was led out the same private entrance. She did not look at anyone as she left. The trial continued for 2 more weeks, but Gloria did not return. Additional witnesses testified, financial records were examined. The trust fund became a central focus. How much had been spent? On what? Whether Gloria Morgan had used her daughter's money for her own purposes. The trustees testified that repeated requests for additional funds had been denied because the expenses listed were not for the child's benefit. Gloria Morgan's attorney argued that raising a Vanderbilt required substantial expenditure, that the child's social position needed to be maintained. Gertrude's attorney argued that the child needed stability, not status. On November 21st, Justice Carew delivered his decision. He ruled that Gloria would remain in Gertrude Whitney's custody. He stated that the evidence showed Gloria Morgan had neglected her maternal duties, that she had prioritized her own social life over her daughter's welfare, that the child's testimony had been clear. He granted Gloria Morgan visitation rights, 1 weekend per month and 1 month during the summer, always supervised. He maintained the trust fund arrangement, with the trustees continuing to control disbursements. He did not criticize Gloria Morgan's character directly, but his written opinion described her as a woman more concerned with her own pleasures than her child's needs. Gloria Morgan left the courthouse through a side door, surrounded by lawyers. She made no statement to the press. Gertrude Whitney left through the front entrance composed, saying only that she was grateful for the court's wisdom. Gloria herself was not present for the verdict. She was at the Whitney estate in Old Westbury, being kept away from the newspapers, from the photographers, from the public dissection of her family. A nurse told her that afternoon that she would be staying with Aunt Gertrude. Gloria asked if she would see her mother. The nurse said yes sometimes. Gloria asked when. The nurse said she didn't know. The first supervised visit occurred 3 weeks later. Gloria Morgan arrived at the Whitney estate at 2 in the afternoon. She was escorted to a sitting room. Gloria was brought to her. They sat together for 2 hours. A nurse remained in the room, seated by the door. Gloria Morgan tried to talk to her daughter about Paris, about trips they might take someday, about dresses she would buy her. Gloria answered in short sentences. When the visit ended, Gloria Morgan kissed her daughter's forehead. She asked if Gloria loved her. Gloria said yes. Gloria Morgan left. The nurse took Gloria back to her room. That night, one of the household staff reported that the child had cried, but quietly, in a way that suggested she had learned not to make noise. The Whitney estate in Old Westbury sprawled across nearly 600 acres of Long Island. The main house contained 40 rooms, including a ballroom that was rarely used and a library filled with books chosen by decorators rather than readers. Gertrude Whitney had designed portions of the grounds herself, placing sculptures among the gardens, her own work mostly, figures in bronze that depicted motion and struggle. Gloria was given a bedroom on the 2nd floor, facing east. The room had been decorated in pale pink and white. The furniture was antique. A dollhouse sat in one corner, large enough for a child to crawl inside, filled with miniature furniture and tiny porcelain figures. Gloria rarely played with it. The household operated on a strict schedule. Breakfast at 7:30, lessons with a tutor from 9 until noon, lunch at 12:30, outdoor exercise from 2 until 3:30, weather permitting. Dinner at 6, bed by 8. The routine did not vary. Gertrude believed in structure, in discipline, in the idea that children thrived within clear boundaries. She had raised her own children this way. They had turned out well enough. Her daughter Flora had married into British aristocracy. Her son Cornelius managed the family's business interests. The method worked. Gloria would benefit from it. The staff who managed Gloria's daily life were efficient and distant. There was Miss Wixer, the primary governess, who had been with the Whitney family for 15 years. She taught deportment, oversaw meals, and enforced rules without explanation. There was Mrs. Connolly, the cook, who prepared bland, nutritious meals and did not tolerate complaints. There were maids who cleaned Gloria's room each morning while she ate breakfast, who laid out her clothes each evening, who never spoke to her beyond necessary instructions. Gertrude herself appeared infrequently. She breakfasted alone in her studio. She spent most days working on commissions or attending meetings related to the museum. When she did see Gloria, the interactions were formal. Questions about lessons, reminders about posture, brief assessments of the child's appearance and behavior. Gloria attended a small private school in the nearby town, driven there each morning by a chauffeur. The school enrolled children from wealthy families, but even among them, Gloria stood apart. The other students knew about the trial. Their parents had discussed it at dinner. The children asked questions Gloria could not answer. Why had her mother left her? Was it true her mother didn't want her? Did she really have millions of dollars? Gloria learned to say nothing. She sat at her desk, completed her assignments, and spoke only when called upon. At recess, she stood near the building while other children played. Teachers noted her isolation but did not intervene. She was not causing problems. She was simply there. The supervised visits with her mother continued monthly. Gloria Morgan arrived punctually, always dressed as if attending a social event. She brought gifts, dolls, dresses, books with gilt edges. The gifts accumulated in Gloria's room, mostly unopened. During the visits, Gloria Morgan talked about Europe, about people Gloria had never met, about plans for trips they might someday take together. She asked Gloria about school, about her lessons, about whether she was happy. Gloria answered with single words. Yes. No. Fine. The nurse assigned to supervise sat near the window, knitting or reading, occasionally glancing up. The visits lasted exactly 2 hours. When they ended, Gloria Morgan kissed her daughter and left. Gloria returned to her routine. In the summer of 1935, Gloria spent a month with her mother as the custody agreement required. They went to a rented house in Newport, Rhode Island. Gloria Morgan had invited friends, a rotating cast of acquaintances who came for weekends, staying late over cocktails on the terrace. Gloria was given a room at the back of the house. She spent most days with a hired companion, a woman in her 50s who took her to the beach and sat in silence while Gloria built structures in the sand. In the evenings, Gloria ate dinner early and was sent to bed before the adult gatherings began. She could hear laughter through the walls, music from a phonograph, voices that grew louder as the night progressed. On the last day of the month, Gloria Morgan asked if she had enjoyed their time together. Gloria said yes. Gloria Morgan said they would do it again next year. They both knew it would be the same. Back at Old Westbury, Gloria resumed the schedule. Autumn arrived. The grounds turned copper and gold. Gertrude spent more time in the city, attending museum functions and meeting with artists. Gloria saw her less. The governess managed everything. Gloria's 10th birthday came and went with a small cake at dinner and a brief acknowledgement from Gertrude, who gave her a book about Greek mythology. Gloria thanked her. That night, alone in her room, Gloria looked at the illustrations. Gods and mortals, transformations and punishments, stories where no one was entirely safe. In 1936, Gloria developed a persistent cough. The household physician examined her and diagnosed weak lungs. He recommended rest and fresh air. Gertrude arranged for Gloria to spend several weeks at a sanatorium in the Adirondacks, a facility that catered to children from wealthy families recovering from respiratory ailments. Gloria was driven there by the chauffeur, accompanied by Miss Wixer. The sanatorium was austere, white walls, narrow beds, windows kept open regardless of temperature. The children there rarely spoke to one another. They lay in their beds or sat on porches wrapped in blankets, breathing the thin mountain air. Gloria stayed for 6 weeks. When she returned to Old Westbury, the cough had improved, but she had lost weight. Gertrude instructed the cook to increase portions. Gloria ate what was placed in front of her. The years folded into one another with little variation. Gloria turned 12, then 13. Her body began to change. Gertrude arranged for a nurse to explain menstruation in clinical terms. Gloria was given pamphlets to read. She was told this was natural and nothing to be ashamed of. She was also told not to discuss it with anyone. When Gloria began menstruating, she managed it alone, following the instructions she had been given, asking no questions. Her education continued with tutors who came to the house. She studied literature, mathematics, French, and history. She was a diligent student, not because she was curious, but because compliance was easier than resistance. Her tutors noted that she rarely asked questions, that she completed assignments correctly, but without enthusiasm. One tutor mentioned to Gertrude that Gloria seemed unusually subdued for a girl her age. Gertrude replied that the child had been through difficulties and needed time to adjust. The tutor did not bring it up again. Gloria's mother continued her monthly visits. By now the pattern was established. Gloria Morgan arrived, spent 2 hours in the sitting room, left. The gifts she brought became more elaborate. Jewelry, a fur stole, a music box that played a lullaby. Gloria accepted each gift politely and placed it with the others in her room. Once, Gloria Morgan asked if she wore the necklace that had been given months earlier. Gloria said no. Gloria Morgan asked why. Gloria said she had nowhere to wear it. Gloria Morgan said she should wear it anyway to remember her mother loved her. Gloria wore it once during the next visit, then returned it to its box. At 14, Gloria began to understand that she was a possession, not a daughter exactly, not a person with desires that mattered. She was an asset to be managed, a responsibility to be met, a problem that had been legally resolved. Gertrude provided for her material needs with thoroughness. Her clothes were expensive and well-made. Her education was comprehensive. Her health was monitored. But no one asked what she thought about her life. No one asked if she was lonely. The assumption was that loneliness was a small price to pay for security, for the comfort of knowing she was being properly raised. She began to notice that other girls at school talked about their families with ease. Stories about dinners, about arguments, about shared jokes. She had no such stories. When asked about her family, she said she lived with her aunt. When pressed, she said her mother lived in the city. She did not mention the trial. She did not mention the visits. She learned to deflect, to redirect conversation, to make herself unremarkable. In 1938, Gloria turned 14. Gertrude informed her that she would be presented to society when she turned 18, that preparations would begin in the next few years. There would be etiquette lessons, dance instruction, introductions to appropriate young men from suitable families. Gloria listened. She understood that this was not a question. This was the next phase of the plan. She would be molded into someone who could move through the world Gertrude inhabited, who could marry well, who could carry the Vanderbilt name without embarrassment. What Gloria wanted was irrelevant. What Gloria would become had already been decided. She spent more time alone. She walked the estate grounds in the afternoons, moving between the sculptures her aunt had made. She looked at the bronze figures, a woman reaching upward, a man bent under weight, a child frozen mid-step. They were permanent, fixed in positions they could never leave. She understood them better than she understood the people in the house. Gloria met Pat DiCicco at a party in Manhattan in the spring of 1941. She was 17 years old. Gertrude had begun allowing her to attend certain social events, carefully selected gatherings where the guests were vetted and the hosts were known. This particular party was held at the home of a Whitney family friend, a woman who collected modern art and invited people from the film industry alongside old society names. Gloria had been brought by a cousin, introduced around, and left to navigate conversations she had not been prepared for. DiCicco was 32, a Hollywood agent who represented actors and had connections to studio executives. He was handsome in a way that photographs captured well. Dark hair, sharp features, expensive suits. He moved through the party with ease, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, performing charm. He noticed Gloria standing near a window holding a glass of champagne she had not sipped. He approached. He introduced himself. He asked if she was bored. She said no. He said she looked bored. She almost smiled. They talked for 20 minutes. He asked about her life, and she gave the rehearsed answers. She lived with her aunt. She had been educated privately. She was being introduced to society. He asked what she wanted to do. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked that before. She said she didn't know. He said that was honest, at least. He gave her his card before leaving. He said if she ever wanted to escape, she should call him. She kept the card. She called him 3 weeks later. Gertrude had scheduled another etiquette lesson, another afternoon of learning which fork to use and how to exit a room gracefully. Gloria called from a phone in the library when the house was quiet. DeChico answered. She said she wanted to see him. He said he would pick her up. She said that wasn't possible. He asked where she could meet him. She named a restaurant near the Whitney townhouse in Manhattan. He said he would be there. They began meeting in secret. Not often, once every 2 weeks, sometimes less. They met in public places where she was unlikely to be recognized, or where recognition wouldn't matter. He took her to restaurants in neighborhoods Gertrude never visited. He took her to a jazz club where the music was loud enough that conversation became unnecessary. He talked about Hollywood, about actors he represented, about deals being negotiated. She listened. He asked questions about her life that went beyond the surface. He asked if she was happy. She said she didn't think about it. He said that meant no. By summer, the meetings had become more frequent. DeChico was attentive in a way no one else had been. He remembered what she said. He called when he said he would. He made her feel seen, not as an asset or an obligation, but as someone whose presence mattered. She was 17 and had never been looked at that way. She began to believe he understood her. She began to believe he could offer something different. In September, he asked her to marry him. They were sitting in his car outside a theater in Midtown. He said he wanted to take care of her. He said she deserved better than the life she was living. He said she could come to California, away from her aunt, away from the supervision and the schedule and the constant monitoring. She would be free. She said yes without hesitation. The logistics were complicated. Gloria was 17, below the legal age of consent in New York. Gertrude would never approve. DeChico suggested they go to California, where the age of consent was younger and where a marriage could be arranged quickly. Gloria agreed. They planned to leave in December, after Gloria's birthday. She told no one. She packed a single suitcase and hid it in her closet. On December 28, 1941, 3 weeks after she turned 18, she left the Whitney estate without telling anyone where she was going. DeChico picked her up at a prearranged location. They drove to the airport. They flew to Los Angeles. The wedding took place on December 28th in Beverly Hills. The ceremony was small. A judge, 2 witnesses DeChico had hired for the occasion, no family. Gloria wore a suit she had bought the day before. DeChico wore a dark blue suit and smiled throughout. The vows were standard. The marriage certificate was signed. Afterward, they went to dinner at a restaurant where DeChico knew the owner. He ordered champagne. Gloria drank more than she intended. That night, in a rented bungalow, the marriage was consummated. Gloria did not enjoy it, but she had not expected to. She had expected escape, and that was what she had gotten. The news reached Gertrude within 2 days. She was furious, not because she cared about Gloria's happiness, but because the marriage was a public embarrassment. A Vanderbilt heiress eloping with a Hollywood agent. It would be in every newspaper. It would undo years of careful reputation management. She contacted her lawyers. They informed her that Gloria was now 18, legally an adult, and that the marriage was valid. There was nothing to be done. Gertrude sent a brief telegram to Gloria. It read, "You have made your choice. Do not expect support." Gloria did not respond. She was in California, living in DeChico's house in the Hollywood Hills. The house was smaller than she expected, decorated in a style that felt temporary. Rented furniture, minimal personal touches. DeChico worked long hours. He left early in the morning for meetings. He returned late, often smelling of cigarettes and whiskey. Gloria spent days alone. She had no friends in Los Angeles. She knew no one. DeChico said she would meet people eventually, but he did not introduce her to anyone. When she asked if she could accompany him to industry events, he said it was better if she stayed home. He said his work required focus, and bringing a wife would complicate things. The first time he hit her was 6 weeks into the marriage. They had argued about something minor. She had forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. He had come home late, tired, and asked where his clothes were. She said she had forgotten. He asked how she could forget something so simple. She said she was sorry. He said sorry wasn't enough. He slapped her across the face hard enough that she fell against the wall. Then he left the room. She stood there, her cheek burning, unsure what had just happened. He came back 10 minutes later and apologized. He said he was under pressure at work. He said it wouldn't happen again. She believed him because believing him was easier than acknowledging what the alternative meant. It happened again 3 weeks later, and then again. The pattern established itself quickly. He would come home in a bad mood. Something would trigger his anger. A comment she made, a meal she prepared incorrectly, her presence when he wanted silence. He would hit her, or shove her, or grab her arm hard enough to leave bruises. Then he would apologize, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with promises. He said he loved her. He said she made him crazy. He said if she just tried harder, if she paid more attention, if she stopped doing things that upset him, it would stop. Gloria tried harder. She memorized his preferences. She learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. She arranged her days around his moods. It did not stop. The violence became routine. She learned to anticipate it, to read the signs, the set of his jaw, the tone of his voice, the way he poured his drinks. She learned to make herself smaller, to take up less space, to need less. She had escaped one form of control and found another. She did not tell anyone. She had no one to tell. Her mother sent occasional letters asking how married life was, suggesting they meet for lunch when she was in California. Gloria wrote back with vague pleasantries. Everything was fine. She was adjusting. DeChico was wonderful. She did not mention the bruises she covered with makeup. She did not mention lying awake at night, listening to him breathe beside her, wondering if this was what the rest of her life would be. In the summer of 1942, Gloria discovered she was pregnant. She told DeChico over breakfast. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said they couldn't have a child. He said his career was at a critical point. He said a baby would ruin everything. He said she needed to take care of it. She understood what he meant. She made an appointment with a doctor DeChico knew, a man who performed procedures for women in situations like hers. The procedure was done in a private clinic. It was painful and brief. DeChico picked her up afterward. He did not ask how she felt. He said it was for the best. She said nothing. The marriage lasted 3 more years. Gloria stayed because leaving meant admitting she had failed, meant returning to Gertrude or her mother with nothing to show for her escape except bruises and shame. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go. She stayed because staying was what she knew how to do. But by 1945, even staying had become impossible. DeChico's violence had escalated. The apologies had stopped. He no longer pretended remorse. He hit her when he felt like it, for reasons she could not predict or prevent. In April 1945, Gloria left while DeChico was away on business. She packed 2 suitcases. She took a taxi to the airport. She flew to New York. She did not tell him she was leaving. She simply left. When he returned and found her gone, he called, demanding she come back. She said no. He threatened her. She hung up. He called again. She did not answer. She filed for divorce in June. The grounds were cruelty. DeChico did not contest it. The divorce was finalized in October. Gloria was 21 years old. She had been married for less than 4 years. She had no home, no money of her own, beyond what the trust provided, and no idea what to do next. She moved into a small apartment in Manhattan. She avoided Gertrude, avoided her mother, avoided anyone who might ask questions. She spent weeks alone, trying to understand what had happened. She had wanted escape. She had gotten a different cage. Gloria met Leopold Stokowski in the winter of 1945 at a dinner party hosted by a mutual acquaintance in Manhattan. Stokowski was 63 years old, a conductor who had led the Philadelphia Orchestra for decades, and was known for his dramatic interpretations and his carefully cultivated public image. He had white hair that he wore long theatrical gestures, and a voice he had trained to sound vaguely European, despite being born in London to Polish and Irish parents. He was famous, respected, and recently divorced from his second wife. Gloria was 21. She had been in New York for 3 months. Still recovering from the divorce, still trying to construct some version of a life, she attended the dinner party reluctantly, brought by a friend who insisted she needed to leave her apartment. Stokowski was seated across from her. He watched her throughout the meal. When he spoke, he directed his comments to her, asking about her interests, her thoughts on music, whether she had been to the symphony recently. She answered carefully. He listened with an intensity that felt overwhelming. After dinner, he asked if he could call on her. She said yes, uncertain why. He called the next day. He invited her to a rehearsal. She went. She sat in an empty concert hall and watched him conduct. Watched the way he commanded the orchestra with minimal movement, the way musicians followed his smallest gesture. Afterward, he took her to dinner. He talked about music as though it were the only thing that mattered, as though everything else in the world was trivial by comparison. He asked what she wanted from life. Free, she said she didn't know. He said she needed someone to show her what was possible. They saw each other frequently over the following weeks. He took her to concerts, to museums, to his apartment where he played recordings and explained what she should listen for. He was instructive, patient in the way a teacher is patient with a promising student. He told her she had been wasted on people who didn't understand her. He said she needed structure, guidance, someone who could see her potential. She listened. She had just left a marriage that had nearly destroyed her. Stokowski offered something that felt like safety. Not tenderness exactly, but certainty. He knew what he wanted. He knew what she should want. They married on April 21st, 1945 in Mexico. The wedding was quiet, attended by a few of Stokowski's friends and none of Gloria's family. She wore a simple dress. He wore a dark suit. The ceremony was brief. Afterward, they returned to New York, where Stokowski had rented a large apartment on Fifth Avenue. Gloria moved in. The apartment was filled with his things, scores, recordings, furniture he had collected over decades. There was no space that was hers. She unpacked her suitcases into a closet he had cleared for her. She hung her clothes beside his. She understood this was his life, and she was entering it. The marriage was structured around his work. He rehearsed in the mornings. He conducted in the evenings. He traveled frequently. Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Europe when travel became easier after the war. Gloria accompanied him when he allowed it, stayed home when he preferred to go alone. She sat through rehearsals, learning to stay quiet, learning not to interrupt. She attended concerts, sitting in boxes where she was visible, applauding at the right moments. She met conductors, composers, musicians who treated her politely, but viewed her primarily as Stokowski's young wife. In 1946, Gloria became pregnant. She told Stokowski over breakfast. He paused, set down his coffee, and said a child would be manageable. Not a celebration, not joy, manageable. He continued eating. Gloria understood that the pregnancy was something to be accommodated, not something that would change the essential structure of their life. She gave birth to their first son, Leopold Stanislaus Stokowski, in August 1947. The delivery was difficult. She was in labor for 16 hours. Stokowski visited the hospital briefly after the birth, looked at the infant, said he looked healthy, and returned to a rehearsal. Gloria hired a nurse to care for the baby. Stokowski preferred it that way. He did not want his work disrupted by an infant's crying, by the logistics of feeding and changing, and the chaos that children brought. The nurse managed everything. Gloria saw her son at scheduled times, mornings before Stokowski woke, afternoons when he was at rehearsal. She held him, fed him when the nurse allowed it, tried to connect with this small person she had created, but the baby felt distant, like something she was observing rather than part of her life. A second son, Christopher, was born in January 1952. The same pattern repeated. Another nurse was hired. Stokowski remained focused on his conducting. Gloria moved between rooms in the apartment, occupying space but not inhabiting it. She tried to create routines with her sons, but the routines were always secondary to Stokowski's needs. If he was home, they were expected to be quiet. If he was working, she was expected to manage the children elsewhere. She took them to parks, to museums, to her mother's apartment when her mother was in the city. But she could not escape the feeling that she was performing motherhood rather than living it. Stokowski was not cruel. He did not hit her. He did not rage. But he was absent in a way that felt totalizing. He inhabited his own world, a world of music, of artistic vision, of legacy. Gloria existed on the periphery. He provided for her financially. He took her to important events. He introduced her to people of significance. But he did not ask what she thought. He did not ask if she was happy. When she tried to talk about feeling isolated, he said she had everything she needed. When she suggested they spend more time together as a family, he said his work required focus. When she asked if he loved her, he said love was implied by marriage. The years accumulated. Gloria turned 25, then 30. Her sons grew. They learned to be quiet around their father, to seek their mother's attention during the limited hours she was available. Stokowski aged. He conducted less frequently. His reputation, once unassailable, began to fade as younger conductors emerged. He became bitter about critics, about orchestras that no longer invited him, about a world that had moved on. He spent more time at home, which meant Gloria had less freedom to move through the apartment without encountering his mood. In the mid-1950s, Gloria began to paint. She had no training, but she bought supplies and set up a small area in a spare room. She painted abstracts, shapes and colors that had no clear meaning, that were simply a way to fill time. Stokowski saw the paintings once and said they were fine, a reasonable hobby. He did not look at them again. Gloria painted anyway. It was something that belonged to her, something Stokowski had no interest in controlling because he did not view it as significant. She also began attending social events without him. Stokowski had become less interested in parties, in maintaining appearances. Gloria went alone. She met people, artists, writers, people who moved in circles adjacent to Stokowski's but not defined by him. She talked to them. She flirted occasionally, though she never acted on it. She simply wanted to feel like someone saw her as more than Stokowski's wife. By 1955, the marriage had settled into a pattern of polite distance. They lived in the same apartment, but occupied separate lives. Stokowski worked. Gloria managed the household and the children. They ate meals together when his schedule allowed. They attended events together when necessary. They slept in the same bed, though intimacy had become rare and perfunctory. Gloria had stopped expecting more. She had married him for stability, and stability was what she had. The cost was everything else. She thought about leaving, but leaving required a plan, required somewhere to go, and something to do. She was 31 years old. She had 2 children. She had no career, no skills beyond what she had learned through osmosis. How to dress, how to speak at parties, how to appear composed. The trust fund provided income, but the trustees still controlled it. She could survive financially, but what would she do? Where would she go? The questions felt insurmountable. In 1956, she met Sidney Lumet at a party. He was a director, younger than Stokowski, intense in a different way. They talked for an hour. He asked about her life. She gave the usual answers. He said she seemed sad. She said she wasn't. He said he didn't believe her. She thought about him for days afterward. When he called 2 weeks later and asked to see her, she said yes. She knew what it meant. She went anyway. The affair lasted 3 months before Stokowski discovered it. He did not find them together. He found a letter Lumet had written, left in a drawer Gloria had forgotten to lock. Stokowski confronted her calmly. He asked if she wanted a divorce. She said yes. He said he would not contest it. He asked that she not seek custody of their sons. She said she would not fight him for them. She understood they had always been more his than hers, that she had been allowed to mother them only within the boundaries he set. He filed for divorce in July 1955. It was finalized in August. Gloria moved out of the apartment on Fifth Avenue. She took her paintings, her clothes, and little else. Stokowski kept the furniture, the apartment, the sons. Gloria was granted visitation rights, but the boys remained with their father. They were 8 and 3 years old. Stokowski hired staff to care for them. He continued conducting, traveling, living the life he had always lived. Gloria rented a smaller apartment downtown. She was 31 years old and divorced for the second time. She had 2 sons she barely saw and no clear idea what came next. Gloria married Sidney Lumet in August 1956, 2 weeks after her divorce from Stokowski was finalized. The wedding took place at her mother's apartment with fewer than 10 people present. Lumet was 32, 5 years younger than Gloria. already establishing himself as a director with serious ambitions. He had directed live television dramas and was moving into film. He talked about art, about social responsibility, about using cinema to examine difficult questions. Gloria found his certainty appealing. After Stokowski's cold remoteness, Lumet's intensity felt like attention. The marriage began with hope. Lumet included her in his work, asking her opinion on scripts, bringing her to sets, introducing her to actors and writers. For the first time, Gloria felt she was part of something larger than herself. She attended screenings. She listened to Lumet and his colleagues debate political ideas and artistic choices. She tried to contribute, though she often felt she had nothing substantive to offer. Her education had been about comportment, not ideas. She knew how to enter a room, not how to argue about Stanislavski or the blacklist. But the marriage gave her something else, proximity to a world she had been trying to enter for years. Lumet moved in circles that intersected with New York society. Not old society, not the world Gertrude inhabited, but the cultural elite, people whose names appeared in newspapers for reasons beyond inheritance. Gloria wanted to be part of that world, not as someone's wife, but as someone recognized in her own right. She began hosting dinner parties at their apartment, inviting directors, actors, writers. She wore designer clothes, carefully chosen. She made sure the food was impressive. She laughed at jokes and asked questions designed to keep conversation flowing. She was trying to build a reputation to become someone people wanted to invite, someone who mattered. But the invitations she wanted, to the right benefits, the right galas, the right private dinners, did not come. Old money society had never accepted her. Despite the Vanderbilt name, despite the wealth, she remained the child from the custody trial, the girl who had testified against her mother, the heiress who had married badly twice. The families who controlled access to that world remembered. They did not forget scandals. They certainly did not forgive them. Gloria tried different approaches. She joined charity committees offering to help organize events. She donated money to museums and hospitals, making sure her contributions were noted in programs. She attended gallery openings and theater premieres, positioning herself where she would be photographed. She cultivated friendships with women who were already inside the world she wanted to enter, hoping proximity would translate to acceptance. It rarely worked. She was invited to large events, fundraisers with hundreds of attendees, galas where tickets were sold to anyone who could afford them. But the smaller gatherings, the intimate dinners, the weekend parties at country estates, those invitations went to others. She would read about events in society columns, see photographs of people she knew attending parties she had not been invited to. She asked why once, carefully, of a woman she considered a friend. The woman hesitated, then said that Gloria's past made certain people uncomfortable. She did not specify which past, the trial, the divorces, the general accumulation of public messiness that clung to Gloria, despite her attempts to move beyond it. Gloria intensified her efforts. She hired a publicist to manage her image, to place favorable stories in magazines. Articles appeared describing her as a patron of the arts, a supportive wife to a brilliant director, a woman of taste and refinement. Photographs showed her at cultural events, always impeccably dressed, always smiling. The articles did not mention the custody trial. They did not mention Pat DiCicco. They carefully framed her marriages to Stokowski and Lumet as evidence of her artistic sensibility rather than her instability. In 1957, Gloria decided to host a major benefit for a children's hospital. She rented a ballroom, hired caterers, convinced Lumet to screen a short film he had directed. She sent invitations to everyone who mattered: old society families, new cultural figures, politicians, philanthropists. She spent months planning every detail. The event would demonstrate her seriousness, her commitment to meaningful causes. It would prove she was more than a name and a scandal. The night of the benefit, 200 people attended. The ballroom looked perfect. Flowers, lighting, carefully arranged seating. Gloria wore a main-boucher gown and greeted guests at the entrance. Many of the people she most wanted to see did not come. The old society families sent regrets or simply did not respond. The younger cultural crowd attended, actors, directors, writers. But the people whose acceptance Gloria craved, the ones who controlled the gates to the world she wanted, were absent. The benefit raised money. The hospital sent a thank you letter. The society columns mentioned the event briefly, noting it was well attended, without naming most of the attendees. Gloria understood what that meant. She tried again. She joined the board of a small museum, one that needed donors more than it needed prestige. She attended every meeting, contributed substantial funds, volunteered for committees. She thought visibility would lead to acceptance. Instead, she found herself doing administrative work while other board members, women with older names and quieter scandals, made the decisions. When the museum held its annual gala, Gloria was seated at a table near the back, far from the major donors and the museum's leadership. She smiled through the evening. She went home and told Lumet she had a headache. Lumet noticed her preoccupation. He asked why she cared so much about people he considered trivial. She said she didn't care, but they both knew she was lying. He suggested she focus on something that mattered, something beyond trying to impress people who were never going to accept her. She asked what he thought she should focus on. He said she could take classes, develop a skill, find something she was actually interested in. She said she was interested in being taken seriously. He said being taken seriously required doing something serious. She stopped talking to him about it. The marriage began to fray. Lumet was working constantly, often out of the city for months at a time on film shoots. When he was home, he was preoccupied with editing, with the next project. Gloria accompanied him less frequently. She had her own schedule, committee meetings, charity lunches, appointments with designers and decorators. They lived parallel lives that occasionally intersected over dinner or in bed. Conversations became transactional. He asked about her day. She summarized. She asked about his work. He gave brief answers, too tired to elaborate. In 1959, Gloria began an affair with a photographer she met at a gallery opening. He was younger, unattached to her world, unimpressed by her name. They met in hotel rooms in the afternoons. The affair lasted 4 months before she ended it. It had been a distraction, not a solution. Lumet never knew, or if he did, he never mentioned it. Their marriage continued, held together by inertia and the fact that neither had a compelling reason to leave yet. Gloria turned 35 in 1959. She had been married 3 times. She had 4 sons, 2 with Stokowski, whom she rarely saw, 2 more she would have with her next marriage. She had spent years trying to gain acceptance into a world that had made clear she was not welcome. She had money, a famous name, access to cultural events and social circles, but the specific form of belonging she wanted, the quiet, unquestioned acceptance of old society, remained out of reach. She hosted more parties. She increased her charitable giving. She appeared at more events, always photographed, always smiling. She collected invitations like evidence, proof that she was included, but the invitations that mattered most never came. She was invited to events where anyone with money could buy entry. She was not invited to the private gatherings, the weekend retreats, the small dinners where the real decisions and connections were made. By 1960, Gloria had begun to understand that no amount of effort would change this. The doors were closed, not because of anything she was doing wrong now, but because of what had been done to her and what she had done decades earlier. The trial had marked her. The divorces had confirmed what people already believed, that she was unstable, inappropriate, someone who would always bring chaos. She could be seen at public events, she could give money, she could host parties that people attended because the food was good and the guest list was interesting, but she could not be one of them. She stayed married to Lumet until 1963, longer than the marriage had any real life left. When they finally divorced, the reasons given were vague: incompatibility, different priorities. The truth was simpler. They had run out of things to say to each other. Lumet had his work. Gloria had her efforts at social acceptance, which Lumet found increasingly desperate. They separated quietly. The divorce was finalized in August 1963. Gloria was 39 years old and looking for the next thing that might make her feel less like she was failing at a test she had never been taught how to pass. Gloria met Wyatt Cooper in the autumn of 1963 at a dinner party in Manhattan. Cooper was a writer, 40 years old, originally from Mississippi. He had left the South years earlier, moving to New York to pursue acting before shifting to writing. He wrote screenplays, magazine articles, book reviews, work that paid inconsistently but gave him a sense of purpose. He was thoughtful, soft-spoken, and had none of the aggressive ambition Gloria had encountered in her previous husbands. He listened more than he talked. When he did speak, his words were careful, considered. They sat next to each other at dinner. He asked about her life in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. She gave her usual answers, vague descriptions of her charitable work, mentions of her children, careful omissions of everything that mattered. He asked follow-up questions that suggested he was actually paying attention. When she asked about his work, he talked about a screenplay he was writing, about trying to capture something true, about families and the lies they told themselves. She said it sounded difficult. He said most things worth doing were. They began seeing each other within weeks. Cooper had no money beyond what he earned from writing. He lived in a small apartment in Greenwich Village, furnished with second-hand pieces and books stacked on every surface. Gloria visited him there, sitting on his worn couch while he made coffee in a kitchen barely large enough for one person. The apartment was nothing like the spaces she had lived in. No grandeur, no carefully curated objects, just a place where someone worked and slept. She found it oddly comforting. Cooper did not care about her name. He knew who she was. Everyone did. But he treated the knowledge as incidental. He asked about her sons, about what kind of relationship she had with them. She admitted it was complicated. She saw the two sons from her marriage to Stokowski occasionally, supervised visits that felt formal and strained. They barely knew her. Cooper asked if that bothered her. She said she tried not to think about it. He said that probably meant it bothered her very much. They married on December 24, 1963, in a small ceremony at her apartment. Gloria was 39. Cooper was 40. It was her fourth marriage, his first. The wedding was attended by a few close friends. Her mother came. Gertrude did not. Gloria wore a simple dress, cream-colored, no veil. Cooper wore a suit he had owned for years. The ceremony was brief. Afterward, they had dinner with their guests and went to bed early. There was no honeymoon. Cooper had a deadline for a script. Gloria had committee meetings scheduled for the following week. The marriage was different from the beginning. Cooper did not try to control her. He did not demand she structure her life around his work. He did not disappear for months or treat her presence as an inconvenience. He was simply there, reading at the table while she went through correspondence, asking about her day, offering thoughts when she wanted them. It felt for the first time in Gloria's life like partnership rather than arrangement. In 1965, Gloria became pregnant. She was 41. The pregnancy was difficult. Nausea that lasted months, exhaustion that made it hard to attend her usual obligations. Cooper stayed close, managing household details, bringing her food she could tolerate, reading to her in the evenings. She gave birth to Carter Vanderbilt Cooper in January 1965. The delivery was long, but without major complications. Cooper was present throughout, holding her hand, speaking to her quietly when the pain became overwhelming. Carter was a fragile baby. He cried frequently, slept poorly, seemed perpetually uncomfortable. The pediatrician said some infants were simply more sensitive, that he would likely grow out of it. Gloria hired a nurse, but Cooper insisted they care for Carter themselves as much as possible. He woke for nighttime feedings. He walked Carter through the apartment at 3 a.m, bouncing him gently while Gloria tried to sleep. He changed diapers, warmed bottles, learned the specific rhythm of rocking that sometimes calmed Carter down. Gloria watched Cooper with their son and felt something she had not felt with her other children: involvement. She had been peripheral to her sons with Stokowski, kept at a distance by nurses and by Stokowski's preference that children not disrupt his work. With Carter, she was expected to participate. Cooper handed her the baby, asked her to feed him, involved her in decisions about his care. It was exhausting. It was also the first time she felt like a mother, rather than someone who had given birth. In 1969, Gloria became pregnant again. She was 45. Her doctor warned about risks associated with pregnancy at her age, but the pregnancy progressed without major issues. She gave birth to Anderson Hayes Cooper in June 1969. Anderson was an easier baby than Carter, calmer, more adaptable. He slept through the night within weeks. He cried less. He seemed to accept whatever was happening around him with minimal resistance. Cooper treated both sons with equal attention, but even he noticed the difference between them. Carter required constant reassurance. Anderson seemed content to observe. Carter sought touch, needed to be held, became distressed when left alone even briefly. Anderson could lie in his crib for extended periods, looking at shapes on the wall, making quiet sounds to himself. Cooper said they were just different temperaments. Gloria agreed, but she noticed that Carter's needs felt heavier, more urgent, harder to meet. The apartment they lived in was larger than Cooper's previous place, but still modest by the standards Gloria was used to. Cooper had resisted moving to something grander. He said they didn't need space they wouldn't use. Gloria agreed, though part of her missed the scale of the homes she had lived in before. She had grown up in mansions, had lived in Stokowski's formal apartment on Fifth Avenue. Cooper's preference for simplicity felt virtuous, but it also felt constraining. Still, the marriage held. Cooper continued writing, screenplays that sometimes sold, articles that appeared in magazines Gloria didn't read. She continued her social obligations, though, with less intensity than before. She attended committee meetings, hosted occasional dinners, maintained her charitable commitments. But she also spent more time at home, with Cooper and the boys. She played with Carter and Anderson on the living room floor. She read to them before bed. She was present in a way she had not been with her other sons. Cooper encouraged her to do more than attend charity events. He suggested she take art classes, pursue painting more seriously. She had continued painting over the years, filling canvases in spare rooms, but she had never considered it more than a hobby. Cooper said she had talent, that she should develop it. She enrolled in a class taught by a painter who worked in a studio in Soho. She attended weekly, bringing her work, receiving critique, learning techniques she had never been taught. The paintings improved. They remained abstract, but they gained structure, intentionality. By the early 1970s, Gloria's life had settled into something resembling stability. She had a husband who did not hit her, did not ignore her, did not treat her as an accessory. She had 2 young sons she was actually raising. She had begun to develop a creative practice that belonged to her. It was not the life she had imagined as a teenager at the Whitney estate, but it was bearable. Sometimes it was even good. But stability, Gloria had learned, was not permanent. In 1978, Cooper began experiencing chest pains. He dismissed them as stress, as getting older, as nothing to worry about. Gloria insisted he see a doctor. The doctor ran tests. They found blockages in his arteries, significant enough to require immediate surgery. Cooper underwent open heart surgery in January 1978. The surgery was supposed to be routine. During the procedure, something went wrong. Cooper died on the operating table. He was 50. Gloria received the news in a hospital waiting room. A doctor she had never met before explained what had happened, using words like complications, and did everything possible. She did not cry immediately. She sat in the chair, holding her purse in her lap, nodding as the doctor spoke. She asked if she could see him. They said yes. She went into the room where his body lay covered by a sheet. She pulled the sheet back and looked at his face. He looked like he was sleeping, except he wasn't breathing. She stood there for several minutes. Then she left. Carter was 13. Anderson was 8. Gloria told them their father was dead. Carter cried immediately, collapsed into her, his body shaking. Anderson asked questions. What happened? Why? What would happen now? Gloria answered as best she could. Anderson nodded, processing, then went to his room. Gloria held Carter on the couch for hours while he cried. That night, Anderson came out and asked if they were going to be okay. Gloria said yes. She did not know if she believed it. The funeral was held a week later. Cooper had wanted something simple. Gloria arranged a service at a small chapel, attended by friends and colleagues. She delivered no eulogy. She sat in the front row with Carter and Anderson on either side of her. She listened to other people talk about Cooper, his kindness, his integrity, his talent. She heard the words but could not connect them to the man who was gone. Afterward, people came to the apartment. They brought food. They said they were sorry. They left. Gloria sat in the apartment with her sons and tried to figure out what came next. She was 53 years old. She had been married 4 times. 3 of those marriages had ended in divorce. The 4th had ended with death. She had 2 young sons who now had no father. She had money from the trust fund, enough that financial survival was not a concern. But everything else felt uncertain. Cooper had been the first husband who had made her feel less alone. Without him, the loneliness returned, heavier than before. After Cooper's death, Gloria spent months moving through the apartment like a guest in her own life. She woke, dressed, fed the boys, attended to obligations. She did not paint. She did not host dinners. She answered condolence letters with brief notes and stopped answering the phone unless absolutely necessary. Carter became more withdrawn, spending hours in his room. Anderson adapted with unsettling ease, maintaining his routines, asking fewer questions. Gloria watched both of them and felt she was failing in ways she could not name. By late 1978, the trust fund that had sustained her since childhood was running low. Decades of expenses, homes, staff, divorces, maintaining a certain standard of living had depleted what once seemed inexhaustible. The trustees informed her that without changes, the money would not last. She needed income. She was 54 years old with no professional experience, no degree, no skills that translated to employment. What she had was a name. In early 1979, a businessman named Warren Hirsch approached her with a proposal. Hirsch worked in licensing, connecting celebrity names with products. He had been watching Gloria for years. The society presence, the recognizable name, the careful cultivation of her image. He thought she could be marketable, not as herself exactly, but as a brand. He suggested clothing, specifically jeans. The denim market was expanding beyond workwear into fashion. Designer jeans were becoming popular, sold at department stores for prices that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Women were paying premium amounts for jeans with the right label. Hirsch thought Gloria's name could be that label. Gloria listened to his pitch in her living room. Hirsch explained the financial structure, licensing deals, royalties, minimal risk on her part. She would not design the jeans herself. A team would handle production. Her role would be approval and promotion. She would appear in advertisements, make public appearances, attach her name and reputation to the product. In exchange, she would receive a percentage of sales. If the jeans sold well, the income would be substantial. She asked why anyone would buy jeans with her name on them. Hirsch said because she represented something: taste, class, a certain kind of aspiration. Women who could not afford haute couture could afford jeans. They wanted to feel connected to the world Gloria inhabited, or at least the world they believed she inhabited. Her name would provide that connection. It was not about the jeans themselves. It was about what wearing them would mean. Gloria signed the contract in March 1979. The first Gloria Vanderbilt jeans went into production by summer. The design was standard. Dark denim fitted cut, nothing revolutionary. What made them distinct was the signature embroidered on the back pocket, a flowing cursive Gloria Vanderbilt with a small swan logo. The swan had been chosen by the marketing team. It suggested elegance, European sophistication. Gloria had not chosen it. She had not chosen much of anything. She approved what was presented to her. The marketing campaign launched in late 1979. Gloria appeared in advertisements, photographs, and television commercials where she stood in carefully lit rooms wearing the jeans, her voice describing them as designed for women who understood quality. The tagline was simple: the fit that makes the difference. The advertisements were professional, polished, and everywhere. Magazines, billboards, television spots during prime time. Gloria's face, her name, her signature repeated until they became ambient. The jeans sold. They sold in numbers that surprised even Hirsch. Department stores reordered inventory within weeks. Women lined up at Bloomingdale's and Macy's to buy jeans that cost 3 times what standard Levi's cost. The appeal was not the denim. It was the name on the pocket. The idea that wearing these jeans connected the buyer to Gloria Vanderbilt, to wealth, to a lifestyle that existed mostly in imagination. Gloria began making appearances to promote the brand. She traveled to department stores across the country, standing in front of displays, shaking hands with customers, signing autographs. She appeared on talk shows, answering questions about fashion and her life, carefully steering conversation away from her marriages and toward her business success. She smiled through all of it. She had learned how to smile decades ago, how to perform warmth and confidence, regardless of what she felt. The money arrived in amounts she had not anticipated. By 1980, the jeans were generating millions in revenue. Her royalty checks were substantial enough to stabilize her finances, to secure the boys' futures, to eliminate the financial anxiety that had been building since Cooper's death. She bought a new apartment, larger than the previous one on the Upper East Side. She hired decorators. She purchased furniture, art, objects that filled rooms but did not make the space feel less empty. The success of the jeans led to other licensing deals. Gloria Vanderbilt blouses, Gloria Vanderbilt perfume, Gloria Vanderbilt sheets and towels. Her name appeared on products in multiple departments of every major store. The brand expanded faster than she could track. Companies paid for the right to use her name and signature. She approved designs and meetings that blurred together, signing off on products she would never use. The income continued increasing. She appeared in more advertisements. Television commercials showed her in luxurious settings, a penthouse apartment, a country estate, always surrounded by beautiful objects and impeccable design. The commercials suggested that buying her products would grant access to that world. That luxury could be purchased in increments. The irony was not lost on Gloria. She was selling an image of a life she had never actually lived, a version of wealth without the isolation, control, and emptiness that had defined her actual experience. The business required constant maintenance. She attended industry events, fashion shows, meetings with executives who saw her as an asset to be managed. She was introduced as Gloria Vanderbilt, fashion icon and entrepreneur, a description that felt both accurate and completely false. She had not designed anything. She had lent her name and allowed others to build a business around it. But the distinction did not matter to the public. To them, she was a success story, a woman who had taken her famous name and turned it into something profitable. Critics appeared. Journalists wrote articles questioning whether Gloria Vanderbilt jeans represented anything beyond crass commercialization, whether attaching an aristocratic name to mass-market products was tasteless. Some of her old social circle, the people who had never fully accepted her, expressed disdain. One woman she had known for years said at a party, loudly enough for Gloria to hear, that selling jeans was rather desperate, don't you think? Gloria smiled and said nothing. The jeans continued selling. Carter and Anderson grew up surrounded by their mother's brand. They saw her face on billboards, saw her name in stores, heard her voice on television commercials. Carter seemed embarrassed by it, uncomfortable with the public nature of his mother's work. Anderson accepted it with his characteristic detachment, treating it as a fact of life that required no particular emotional response. Gloria tried to explain to them that the business was necessary, that it provided for them. Carter said he didn't care about the money. Anderson said he understood. By the mid-1980s, Gloria Vanderbilt had become synonymous with affordable luxury, with products that allowed middle-class Americans to feel connected to wealth. The brand had made her wealthy in her own right, independent of the trust fund that had controlled her life since childhood. She appeared on lists of successful businesswomen, was interviewed about breaking barriers in fashion, was held up as an example of entrepreneurial spirit. She accepted the praise because refusing it would have raised questions she did not want to answer. But she knew what the brand actually represented. It was another performance, another version of Gloria Vanderbilt constructed for public consumption. The woman in the advertisements, confident, elegant, in control, bore little resemblance to the woman who returned to her apartment each night, poured a drink, and sat alone in rooms filled with expensive furniture. The business did not solve loneliness. It did not create connection. It provided money and visibility and a reason to maintain appearances. It gave her something to do, a role to play. But the fundamental emptiness remained unchanged. She had spent her life trying to be seen, to be accepted, to matter. The brand made her visible in a way she had never been before. Millions of women bought products with her name, but they were buying an image, not a person. They knew nothing about her except what the advertisements told them. Gloria continued attending fashion shows, meeting with licensees, approving new product lines. The brand expanded into home goods, accessories, cosmetics. Her name appeared on an ever-widening array of products. Each new category generated additional income and additional visibility. She appeared on television programs as a guest, as a personality, as someone whose name recognition made her valuable for ratings. In quieter moments, alone in her apartment after promotional events, Gloria sometimes wondered what she had actually built. A business, certainly. Financial security, yes. But also a kind of trap. She had become inseparable from the brand, from the image that had been created and refined through marketing. She could not step away from it without stepping away from the income it generated, from the visibility it provided, from the sense that she was doing something that mattered, even if she no longer knew what that meant. The years with Wyatt Cooper, before his death, had been the most stable of Gloria's adult life. They had lasted 15 years, 1963 to 1978, longer than all her previous marriages combined. During those years, Gloria had functioned within a structure that Cooper provided not through control, but through presence. He had been there consistently, asking questions, offering thoughts, treating her as someone whose inner life mattered. The marriage had begun in the aftermath of her divorce from Lumet. Gloria had been 39, exhausted from years of trying to force herself into spaces that rejected her, from marriages that had failed in different ways but had all left her feeling diminished. Cooper had not asked her to be anything other than what she was. He had no interest in her social aspirations, no investment in her name beyond the fact that it was attached to a person he wanted to know. In the early years, they had lived quietly. Cooper wrote, Gloria painted. They raised Carter and Anderson with more involvement than Gloria had managed with her older sons. Cooper insisted on routines, family dinners, bedtime stories, weekends spent together, rather than at separate obligations. Gloria had resisted at first, uncomfortable with the domesticity, uncertain how to inhabit the role of present mother. But Cooper had been patient, showing her through example rather than instruction. He had asked about her childhood, about the custody trial, about the years with Gertrude. Gloria had given him fragments, pieces of the story she had never told anyone in full. He had listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything. He had simply acknowledged that what had happened had been damaging, that she had survived it, that survival did not erase the damage. It was the first time anyone had named it that way. Cooper had also noticed things about her that others missed. He noticed that she drank more when she was anxious, that she became silent and distant when reminded of her mother, that she checked the mail obsessively, waiting for invitations that would prove she belonged somewhere. He mentioned these observations gently, not as accusations, but as facts. She had been defensive initially, insisting she was fine. He had said he knew she was not fine, that being not fine was understandable, that she did not need to pretend otherwise with him. The marriage had not been without difficulty. Gloria's need for external validation had remained, and Cooper had found it frustrating. He had asked why she cared so much about people who clearly did not care about her. She had said he did not understand how important acceptance was. He had said he understood, but that she was looking for it in places it would never be found. They had argued about this repeatedly, never violently, never with cruelty, but with an underlying tension that neither could fully resolve. Cooper had also struggled with money. He earned inconsistently. Some years his screenplays sold and generated substantial income. Other years, he worked on projects that never materialized into payment. Gloria's trust fund covered their expenses, but Cooper had been uncomfortable relying on it. He had wanted to contribute equally, to feel he was supporting his family through his own work. Gloria had told him it did not matter, that money was not the measure of his worth. He had said it mattered to him. There had been a period around 1970 when Cooper had considered returning to acting. He had auditioned for several roles, small parts in films and television. He had not gotten any of them. He had been in his late 40s by then, competing with younger actors, carrying the accumulated disappointments of a career that had never quite succeeded. He had stopped auditioning after 6 months and returned to writing. He had not discussed the decision with Gloria, but she had seen the shift in him. A quieter resignation, an acceptance that certain ambitions would remain unfulfilled. Despite these tensions, the marriage had held. Cooper had been devoted to Carter and Anderson. He had attended school events, helped with homework, played with them in ways that were patient and present. He had been the father Gloria's other sons had never had, not because Stokowski had been cruel, but because Stokowski had been absent, treating fatherhood as a role to be performed briefly between other priorities. Carter, in particular, had been close to Cooper. Carter had been a sensitive child, prone to anxiety, easily overwhelmed by changes in routine or unexpected events. Cooper had understood this, had learned how to calm Carter when he became upset, had created predictable structures that helped Carter feel safe. Gloria had watched Cooper with Carter and had felt grateful, but also inadequate. She did not have Cooper's patience. She did not instinctively know how to soothe Carter the way Cooper did. Anderson had been different. He had required less, adapted more easily, seemed content to observe rather than engage. Cooper had paid attention to Anderson as well, but Anderson had not needed the same level of constant reassurance. Gloria had sometimes wondered if Anderson's ease was resilience or something else, an early understanding that needing less meant being disappointed less. In the final years of the marriage, Cooper had been working on a memoir. He had written about his childhood in Mississippi, about his family, about the contradictions of Southern life, gentility and violence, beauty and oppression. He had shown Gloria sections as he completed them. The writing was careful, honest, willing to examine difficult truths without sensationalizing them. Gloria had told him it was good. He had said he hoped to finish it within a year. He had not finished it. The manuscript had been 3/4 complete when he died. Gloria had found it in his desk after the funeral. Pages of typescript, handwritten notes in the margins, sections marked for revision. She had read through it once, slowly, hearing his voice in the sentences. Then she had put it in a box and stored it in a closet. She could not bring herself to throw it away, but she also could not look at it again. Cooper's death had been sudden in a way that made it feel unreal. He had been alive in the morning, complaining of chest pain, dismissing it as stress. By evening he was dead, his body on an operating table, while doctors explained to Gloria what had gone wrong. There had been no time to prepare, no gradual decline, no opportunity to say what needed to be said. He had simply been removed from her life in the space of a few hours. The grief had been different from anything Gloria had experienced before. Her father had died when she was too young to remember. Her marriages to DeCicco, Stokowski, and Lumet had ended in ways that felt like relief more than loss. But Cooper's death left an absence that persisted. She found herself expecting him to walk into a room, to comment on something, to ask how her day had been. The expectation would last for a moment before reality reasserted itself. Carter had taken the death hardest. He had been 13, old enough to understand permanence, young enough to feel unmoored by it. He had cried frequently in the weeks after the funeral, had trouble sleeping, had nightmares that woke him screaming. Gloria had held him, had tried to comfort him, but she had not known what to say. She had told him it would get better with time. She had not been certain that was true. Anderson, 8 years old, had processed the loss differently. He had asked questions, practical questions about what happened during surgery, what death meant physically, what would happen to Cooper's body. Gloria had answered as honestly as she could. Anderson had nodded, absorbing the information, then had returned to his routines with minimal visible disruption. Gloria had worried that he was suppressing his feelings, but when she asked if he was sad, he had said yes. He was sad, but he did not know what else to do about it. In the months after Cooper's death, Gloria had tried to maintain the routines he had established: family dinners, bedtime stories, weekend activities. But without Cooper, the routines felt hollow, like performances of family life rather than the actual thing. She went through the motions because she did not know what else to do, because the alternative was allowing everything to collapse into formlessness. The 15 years with Cooper had been the closest Gloria had come to stability. Not happiness exactly. Happiness felt too definite, too bright, but something quieter, a life that contained difficulties but also contained someone who saw her, who asked what she needed, who treated her presence as valuable. Losing that had confirmed what Gloria had long suspected, that stability was temporary, that building something did not guarantee it would last, that the things she managed to create eventually disappeared, regardless of how carefully she tended them. Gloria had 4 sons, Leopold and Christopher, from her marriage to Stokowski, born in 1947 and 1952. Carter and Anderson, from her marriage to Cooper, born in 1965 and 1969. The custody arrangements and the years between their births meant she had never raised all 4 together, had never functioned as mother to all of them simultaneously. Leopold and Christopher had grown up largely without her, raised by Stokowski and his staff during her brief failed attempts at visitation. Carter and Anderson she had raised with Cooper, and then alone after his death. 4 sons, but the relationships were so different they barely seemed to belong to the same category. Leopold and Christopher had been 7 and 3, when Gloria divorced Stokowski in 1955. The custody agreement had granted her visitation rights, but the visits had been strained from the beginning. Stokowski had maintained control, deciding when she could see them, for how long, under what conditions. The boys had lived with him in the apartment on Fifth Avenue, surrounded by his schedules and his rules. When Gloria visited, she was a disruption, an outsider entering a household that functioned without her. The visits had occurred monthly at first, then less frequently as the boys grew older and developed lives that did not include her. She would arrive at the apartment, be shown to a sitting room, and wait for the boys to be brought to her. They were polite, well-mannered, formal. They called her mother, but the word sounded rehearsed. She asked about school, about their interests, about their lives. They answered briefly. Conversations lasted 30 minutes before silence set in. Stokowski had made clear that her influence should be minimal. He monitored what she said to them, instructed the staff to report back on their interactions, corrected her if he felt she was being inappropriate. Once, when Leopold was 10, Gloria had suggested taking him to a museum. Stokowski had refused, saying the boy's schedule was already full. Gloria had argued that a single afternoon would not disrupt anything. Stokowski had said the decision was final. Gloria had left without seeing Leopold that day. By the time Leopold and Christopher were teenagers, the visits had become perfunctory. They came because Stokowski required it, not because they wanted to see her. Gloria could feel their resentment, their confusion about who she was supposed to be to them. She was not the mother who had raised them, who knew their habits and fears and preferences. She was a woman they saw occasionally, someone they had been told was important, but who felt increasingly irrelevant to their actual lives. Leopold left for college in 1965. Christopher followed in 1970. Once they were adults, the required visits ended. Gloria sent letters, birthday cards, checks. They responded with brief thank you notes. She invited them to dinners, to holidays. They came occasionally, sat through meals, left early. The distance between them was not hostile. It was simply empty. They had no shared history, no accumulated moments that might have built connection. She had given birth to them, but she had not been their mother in any meaningful sense. Christopher married in 1975. Gloria was invited to the wedding. She attended, sat in the back, watched her son marry a woman she had met once. At the reception, Christopher introduced her to his wife's family. They were polite, asked surface-level questions. Gloria understood she was being tolerated rather than welcomed. She left before the dancing started. Christopher sent a thank you note for the gift she had given. They spoke twice more that year, brief phone calls about nothing in particular. Leopold became a musician, teaching music theory at a college in New England. He rarely called. When Gloria reached him by phone, their conversations lasted 5 minutes. Updates on his work, vague mentions of his health, polite inquiries about hers. She asked if she could visit. He said his schedule was difficult. She asked when might be better. He said he would let her know. He did not let her know. With Carter and Anderson, Gloria had been more present. She had fed them, dressed them, put them to bed. She had been there for the daily mechanics of raising children, but presence was not the same as connection. Cooper had provided that. The attention, the patience, the ability to see what each boy needed and respond to it. Without Cooper, Gloria had managed the logistics but struggled with everything else. Carter had always been difficult. As a toddler, he had cried constantly, needed to be held, became hysterical when left alone. As he grew older, the neediness had persisted in different forms. He was anxious about school, about other children, about changes in routine. He asked Gloria repeatedly if she loved him. She said yes. He asked how she knew. She said mothers knew. He did not seem reassured. By the time Carter was 10, Gloria had begun sending him to therapists. The first therapist said Carter was insecure, that he needed consistent reassurance and clear boundaries. Gloria tried to provide both. She told him she loved him every day. She created rules about bedtime, homework, behavior. Carter followed the rules but remained anxious. The second therapist said Carter was depressed, that he might benefit from medication. Gloria resisted at first, uncomfortable with the idea of medicating a child. The therapist said untreated depression could worsen. Gloria agreed to the medication. Carter took it for 6 months, then stopped because he said it made him feel numb. Anderson had been easier, requiring less, adapting to whatever was happening around him. He did well in school, made friends without apparent effort, seemed content to exist without constant validation. Gloria appreciated his independence, but also worried that she was neglecting him, that focusing so much energy on Carter meant Anderson was being overlooked. When she asked Anderson if he felt ignored, he said no, he was fine. She asked if he would tell her if he was not fine. He said probably. After Cooper's death, the differences between the boys became more pronounced. Carter withdrew further, spending hours alone in his room, emerging only for meals. Anderson maintained his routines, continued attending school, participated in activities. Gloria tried to reach Carter, asking what he needed, what would help. Carter said he did not know. She suggested more therapy. He went reluctantly, sat through sessions, told Gloria afterward that it was not helping. She did not know what else to offer. She tried to be present in ways she had not been with Leopold and Christopher. She attended Carter's school events, though he seemed embarrassed when she appeared. She went to Anderson's soccer games, though he did not seem to care whether she was there or not. She cooked dinners, though neither boy ate much. She asked about their days, though their answers were brief and revealed little. The brand work consumed increasing amounts of time. Promotional appearances, product approvals, meetings with licensees. Gloria told herself she was doing it for the boys to secure their futures financially. But the work also provided escape from the apartment, from the weight of Carter's sadness, and Anderson's self-sufficiency. It was easier to perform for cameras than to navigate the silence at home. She hired staff to help, a housekeeper, a cook, a driver. The staff managed details she did not have energy for. They ensured meals were prepared, laundry was done, appointments were kept. The boys interacted with the staff more than they interacted with Gloria. She told herself this was temporary, that once the brand stabilized, she would have more time. The brand did not stabilize. It expanded. Carter's mental health deteriorated through his teenage years. He struggled in school, not because he was incapable, but because he could not focus, could not find motivation. He had friends briefly, then lost them when his mood became too heavy for them to manage. He talked about feeling empty, about not seeing the point of anything. Gloria took him to psychiatrists who diagnosed depression, prescribed medications that Carter took inconsistently. She asked what she could do differently. They said she was doing what she could. Anderson excelled. He was accepted to a prestigious private school, performed well academically, remained socially functional. Gloria attended parent-teacher conferences where she was told Anderson was a model student, engaged, responsible, mature beyond his years. She felt she should be proud, but mostly felt relieved that at least one of her sons was not falling apart. By the time Carter was 18, the distance between them had solidified despite their physical proximity. He lived in her apartment but existed separately, emerging briefly and disappearing again. She tried to talk to him about college, about plans, about what he wanted from life. He said he did not want anything. She said that was not possible. He said it was true anyway. Anderson left for college in 1987, accepted to Yale. Gloria helped him pack, drove him to New Haven, watched him move into his dormitory. He hugged her goodbye, told her not to worry, said he would call. She drove back to Manhattan feeling she had done something right with Anderson, that despite her failures with Leopold and Christopher and her ongoing failure with Carter, Anderson had turned out stable and capable. Carter remained at home. He was 23, not in school, working occasional jobs that he quit after weeks. He slept until afternoon, stayed up through the night, maintained no schedule. Gloria asked what he wanted to do with his life. He said he did not know. She suggested travel, therapy, structure of any kind. He agreed to things and then did not follow through. She grew frustrated, then guilty about her frustration. He was clearly suffering. She did not know how to reach him. The question that had haunted her relationship with Leopold and Christopher now haunted her relationship with Carter. What did it mean to be a mother if the fundamental connection was missing? She had been present with Carter in ways she had not been with her older sons. She had tried to provide what he needed, but trying had not been enough. Carter remained unreachable, locked in something she could not penetrate or understand. She loved him. She believed she loved him, but love had not solved anything. It had not made him whole. It had not made her capable of mothering him effectively. By the mid-1980s, Gloria owned 4 properties. the apartment on Beekman Place in Manhattan where she lived with Carter and, when he was home from college, Anderson. A house in Southampton on Long Island, purchased in 1982, meant for summer weekends but rarely used. A smaller apartment in the city that she had bought as an investment and kept empty except when friends needed a place to stay. And a property in the Catskills, a converted farmhouse on 40 acres that she had seen once, bought impulsively, and visited twice in the 3 years since the purchase. The accumulation had not been strategic. Each property had been acquired for reasons that seemed compelling at the time. The Southampton house because people she knew summered there, because having a presence in the Hamptons felt necessary for maintaining social visibility. The investment apartment because her financial advisor had suggested diversifying assets. The Catskills property because she had been driving through the area with a friend, had seen the farmhouse, had imagined herself living there quietly, away from the city. She had made an offer that afternoon. None of the properties felt like home. The Beekman Place apartment was where she slept and where her sons lived, but it functioned more as a well-appointed hotel than a residence. She had hired decorators who filled it with furniture and art that looked expensive and coordinated. The walls were the right color. The rugs were properly placed. Every surface held objects, sculptures, vases, photographs in silver frames. But nothing in the apartment revealed who she was. It could have belonged to anyone with money and a decorator. The Southampton house was worse. She had bought it furnished, keeping most of what the previous owners had left. She had replaced a few pieces, added some art, changed the curtains. But the house still felt like it belonged to someone else. She had intended to spend weekends there, to host gatherings, to create a summer routine. Instead, she went 3 or 4 times per season, stayed for a night or two, and returned to the city feeling she had wasted time. The house was maintained by a caretaker who lived nearby. He kept the lawn mowed, the pool clean, the interior free of dust. Gloria paid him monthly whether she was there or not. The Catskills property sat empty. She had visited it twice, once when she bought it, once the following spring to see how it looked with leaves on the trees. She had walked through the rooms, imagined herself painting there, imagined quiet days without obligations. But she had not returned. The property required maintenance, repairs to the roof, updates to the plumbing, clearing overgrown brush. She hired local contractors to handle it. They sent invoices. She paid them. The farmhouse remained empty, a structure she owned but did not occupy. The investment apartment was in a building on the Upper West Side. It was smaller than her primary residence, 2 bedrooms, views of the park. She had bought it in 1984 when the market was favorable. She had furnished it minimally: a couch, a bed, basic kitchen items. Occasionally, friends asked to stay there when they were in the city. She gave them keys, told them to make themselves at home. They thanked her, stayed a few days, left. She received thank you notes. The apartment otherwise remained unoccupied, cleaned weekly by a service that had been hired when she bought the place. Gloria told herself the properties were investments. That real estate was a sensible way to allocate resources. But she knew the accumulation served another purpose. The properties were evidence that she had money, that she could afford multiple residences, that she belonged to a class of people who maintained homes they barely used. Owning them proved something she could not prove through other means, that she had succeeded, that she had moved beyond the girl from the custody trial, that she had built a life of substance. But the properties also exposed what success had not provided. She owned 4 places and felt at home in none of them. She moved between structures that held her belongings, but did not hold her. She could go to Southampton or the Catskills or the Upper West Side apartment, but going there changed nothing. The emptiness was portable. It existed regardless of location. She filled the spaces with objects: art purchased from galleries, furniture from auctions, decorative items found in antique stores during trips abroad. She bought things because they were beautiful, because they were expensive, because acquiring them gave her something to do. The objects accumulated. Every surface in every property held something: a bowl, a sculpture, a photograph, a vase. The density of objects made the spaces feel occupied, even when they were empty of people. In the Beekman Place apartment, she had a room designated as her studio. It contained an easel, paints, canvases, brushes arranged neatly on shelves. She had painted regularly in the years after Cooper's death, finding in the activity something that occupied her hands and quieted her mind. But by the late 1980s, she painted rarely. The studio remained set up, ready for use, but she walked past it most days without entering. The readiness was important. It suggested she was still an artist, still someone who created. The actual creating had become optional. She also collected books. Shelves lined the walls in multiple rooms, filled with volumes she had purchased over decades. First editions, art books, novels in hardcover. She read some of them, not many, but some. Most remained on the shelves, spines uncracked, pages unturned. The books made the apartment look cultured, inhabited by someone who valued literature. That was enough. The Southampton house had a library as well, shelves built into the walls, filled with books left by the previous owners. Gloria had not removed them. She had added a few of her own, volumes about gardening and architecture that seemed appropriate for a house in the Hamptons. She had opened none of them. The room existed to be photographed, to demonstrate that the house was not merely a structure, but a residence designed for leisure and intellectual pursuits. She began noticing that other people lived differently. Friends who owned multiple homes actually used them, spending months in one location before moving to another. They spoke about their houses with familiarity, referencing specific rooms and routines, complaining about contractors and weather and neighbors in ways that suggested genuine habitation. Gloria could not speak that way about her properties. She had trouble remembering which art hung in which location, which furniture belonged where. The houses existed more as concepts than as places she actually experienced. In 1986, a journalist writing a profile for a magazine asked to photograph Gloria at her Southampton house. Gloria agreed. She traveled out the day before the shoot to ensure everything looked appropriate. The caretaker had done his job. The house was clean, the grounds maintained. But walking through the rooms, Gloria realized how little of herself existed there. The photographer arrived the next morning with assistants and lighting equipment. They arranged Gloria on the terrace in the living room by the pool. She smiled, positioned herself as directed, answered questions about decorating and design. The resulting article described the house as an elegant retreat where Gloria Vanderbilt finds peace away from the city. She read the description and felt nothing. She considered selling the properties she did not use. The Southampton house, certainly. The Catskills farmhouse. Possibly the investment apartment. But selling required effort. Listing the properties, showing them to potential buyers, negotiating prices. It also required admitting she had made mistakes, that buying them had been impulsive rather than purposeful. She did not sell. She kept them, paid for their maintenance, visited them rarely. Carter commented on it once. He was 22, still living in the Beekman Place apartment, unemployed and depressed. He asked why she kept the Southampton house if she never went there. Gloria said she might use it more in the future. Carter said that seemed unlikely. Gloria asked what he wanted her to do with it. Carter said he did not care. He just thought it was strange to own places you did not occupy. Gloria said a lot of people did that. Carter said that did not make it less strange. The properties became another layer of the image she maintained. Interviews mentioned them. Profiles referenced her homes in Manhattan and Southampton. The plural suggested a life lived across multiple locations, a person whose existence required more than one residence. The reality was that she lived primarily in one apartment and maintained 3 other properties as evidence of a life she did not actually lead. She thought sometimes about what it would mean to actually live in the Catskills farmhouse, to spend weeks there painting and walking the property, to exist without staff and schedules and obligations. But the thought remained abstract. When she imagined herself there alone in a house far from the city, the isolation felt terrifying rather than peaceful. She realized she needed the structures she complained about, the appointments, the appearances, the reasons to leave the apartment. Without them, she would have to confront the silence she spent her life avoiding. The mansions and properties and carefully decorated spaces had not provided what she thought they would. They had not made her feel grounded or secure. They had not created the sense of belonging she had spent decades pursuing. They were simply structures she paid for, filled with objects she had collected, maintained by people she employed. She moved through them like a visitor, touching nothing, changing nothing, leaving no trace. Gloria had been giving money away since the 1950s. Small donations at first, checks written to organizations that sent fundraising letters or whose benefits she attended. By the 1980s, her charitable contributions had become substantial. Tens of thousands annually, distributed across hospitals, museums, arts organizations, foundations supporting children and education. Her name appeared on donor lists, in program acknowledgments, on plaques mounted in lobbies of institutions she had supported. The giving was public, documented, recognized. In 1983, she joined the board of a children's hospital in Manhattan. The hospital had approached her seeking not just her money, but her visibility. Her name on their board would attract other donors, would suggest the institution was worthy of support from people of prominence. Gloria attended her first board meeting in a conference room with views of the East River. She sat at a long table with doctors, administrators, other wealthy donors. They discussed budgets, expansion plans, fundraising strategies. Gloria listened, nodded, voted when votes were called. She understood her role was not medical expertise, but social capital. The board required attendance at fundraising events. Gloria went to galas, silent auctions, donor dinners. She smiled in photographs, shook hands with major contributors, thanked people for their generosity. The hospital sent press releases noting her involvement. Local newspapers printed stories about Gloria Vanderbilt's commitment to children's health. The stories did not mention that her attendance at board meetings was sporadic, that she rarely spoke during discussions, that her primary contribution was financial and symbolic rather than substantive. She also supported arts organizations. She gave money to museums, theater companies, dance troupes. She attended exhibitions and performances, her presence noted in society columns. She hosted fundraising dinners at her apartment, inviting people who could write large checks. The dinners were catered, the guest lists carefully curated. Gloria moved through her own living room like a hostess at a hotel, ensuring glasses were filled and conversations were facilitated. Afterward, thank you notes arrived praising her generosity and commitment to the arts. The praise felt hollow but acceptable. The giving was genuine in the sense that the money was real and the institutions used it for their stated purposes. But it was also transactional. Gloria gave money and received recognition. Her name on donor lists suggested she was a person of substance, someone who used her wealth for good. The charitable work countered other narratives: the divorces, the custody trial, the commercial enterprise of selling genes with her name. Philanthropy provided respectability that her personal life had complicated. She was aware of this dynamic but did not examine it closely. When asked in interviews about her charitable work, she said she believed in giving back, in supporting causes that mattered. She said children's health and the arts were important to her. She did not say that the giving also served her image, that it was part of the larger project of making Gloria Vanderbilt mean something beyond scandal and commerce. The journalists did not ask. They printed her statements and noted her generosity. In 1985, a foundation focused on child welfare asked Gloria to chair their annual benefit. The event would raise money for programs supporting children in foster care, children from abusive homes, children whose circumstances resembled what Gloria's had been. The foundation's director explained this during their first meeting, drawing a direct line between Gloria's childhood and the children they served. Gloria understood the appeal. Her participation would add narrative weight to the fundraising, would suggest she had overcome trauma and was now helping others do the same. She agreed to chair the benefit. The planning consumed months. Committees were formed, venues were considered, auction items were solicited. Gloria attended meetings, approved decisions, lent her name to invitations. The benefit took place in May at a hotel ballroom. 500 people attended. Gloria gave a brief speech about the importance of protecting vulnerable children, about ensuring they had safe homes and opportunities for stable futures. She did not mention her own childhood directly, but the implication was clear. The audience applauded. The benefit raised $400,000. Afterward, the foundation's director thanked Gloria profusely. She said Gloria's involvement had made the event possible, that her willingness to lend her story had inspired donations. Gloria accepted the thanks. She did not say that her story had been packaged and simplified, that the childhood she had referenced bore little resemblance to the actual experience of growing up under Gertrude's control. The narrative used for fundraising was cleaner. Poor little rich girl overcomes adversity. becomes successful, gives back. The reality had been messier, darker, less resolved, but the messy version did not work for Galas. She continued chairing the benefit for 3 years. Each year, the same process repeated. Committees, planning, speeches. Each year she stood before audiences and spoke about protecting children, about giving them what they needed to thrive. She believed what she said. She also knew she had failed to protect her own children in ways that mattered. Carter was proof of that, but the failure was private. The public performance was successful. The benefits raised money. The foundation sent thank you plaques. Other requests followed. Organizations heard about her involvement with children's causes and asked her to support their work. She said yes more often than no. She joined additional boards, attended more events, wrote more checks. The charitable work became another layer of her schedule, another set of obligations that filled time and provided structure. She told herself the work mattered, that the money she gave made a difference. She also knew the work served her need to be seen as someone who mattered. The philanthropy could not erase how the Vanderbilt fortune had been built. Her great-great-grandfather Cornelius had made his money through railroads and shipping, industries built on labor that was paid minimally, that operated with little regard for worker safety or welfare. The fortune had been extracted from people who had no choice but to work for whatever wages were offered. Gloria had not built the fortune. She had inherited a fraction of it, but the money she gave away, the charitable work she supported, could not undo the conditions that had created the wealth in the first place. She thought about this occasionally, late at night when she could not sleep, when the apartment was quiet and her mind moved toward uncomfortable questions. The money she donated to children's hospitals had come from a trust fund built on exploitation. The arts organizations she supported were funded by wealth accumulated through systems that had enriched a few and impoverished many. Her generosity was enabled by historical cruelty she had not participated in but had benefited from. She did not know what to do with this knowledge except to continue giving money away and hope it mattered more than its source. No one asked these questions publicly. Journalists who interviewed her about her charitable work did not mention the origins of Vanderbilt wealth. Board members at organizations she supported did not question whether her donations were complicated by history. Everyone accepted the money, thanked her for it, and moved forward. The arrangement was convenient. Gloria provided funds and visibility. The organizations provided her with purpose and recognition. No one examined the foundation beneath it. She increased her giving in the late 1980s. By then, the fashion brand was generating substantial income, money that was hers rather than inherited. She could tell herself this money was different, that it came from her work rather than from exploitation she had not participated in. But the brand itself raised questions she preferred not to consider. The jeans were manufactured in factories where workers earned low wages, where conditions were not luxurious. The affordable luxury she sold to middle-class Americans was made possible by labor that was compensated minimally. She did not visit the factories. She signed off on production plans without asking about the people who sewed the seams and attached the labels. The charitable work continued. More boards, more benefits, more donations. Her name appeared on more plaques and in more programs. She was recognized at events for her generosity, given awards for her commitment to causes. She accepted the awards, made brief speeches, posed for photographs. The recognition felt good. It suggested she was using her resources well, that she was more than a woman who had married badly and sold jeans. It suggested her life had meaning beyond personal failure. But the meaning remained external. The plaques and acknowledgments and thank you letters accumulated in drawers and boxes. They proved she had given money, that organizations valued her support. They did not address the internal emptiness, the sense that no amount of giving would fill what was missing. She gave because it was expected, because it provided structure, because it was better than doing nothing. The giving changed things for the institutions she supported. It changed nothing for her. Carter turned 23 in January 1988. He was living in Gloria's apartment on Beekman Place, sleeping in a bedroom down the hall from hers. He had no job, no regular schedule, no plans. He woke in the afternoon, moved through the apartment like someone who was lost, and returned to his room by evening. Gloria saw him during these transits, brief encounters in the hallway, silent meals eaten together when she insisted, moments that revealed nothing about what he was thinking or feeling. She had been trying to help him for years. Therapists, psychiatrists, medications that were prescribed and abandoned. Carter went to appointments when Gloria scheduled them, sat through sessions, answered questions the doctors asked. But nothing changed. The depression remained, heavy and persistent. He told one psychiatrist that he felt like he was watching his life from outside himself, that nothing felt real or meaningful. The psychiatrist adjusted his medication. Carter took the new pills for 2 weeks, then stopped because he said they made him feel worse. Gloria asked what would help. Carter said he did not know. She asked what he wanted to do with his life. He said the question assumed he wanted to do anything, which he did not. She said everyone wanted something. He said that was not true. She asked if he was suicidal. He said sometimes, but he was not going to do anything about it. She did not know whether to believe him. Anderson was at Yale, calling home occasionally with updates about classes and friends. His life was proceeding normally. Good grades, social connections, plans for the future. When Gloria talked to Anderson about Carter, Anderson said he did not know how to help either. He said Carter had always been difficult, that maybe he needed more intensive treatment than outpatient therapy. Gloria asked if Anderson meant hospitalization. Anderson said maybe. Gloria said she did not want to force Carter into a hospital unless absolutely necessary. Anderson said then she might need to accept that Carter was not going to get better. In March, Carter met a woman at a party. Her name was Sasha. She was 25, worked in fashion, had a confidence that Carter lacked entirely. They began seeing each other. Gloria met Sasha once, briefly, when she came to the apartment to pick Carter up for dinner. Sasha was polite, attractive, seemed surprised that Carter lived with his mother. After they left, Gloria sat in the living room wondering if this relationship would help Carter or simply introduce another variable into an already unstable situation. The relationship lasted 2 months. In May, Carter told Gloria that Sasha had ended it. He said she told him he was too sad, that being around him made her feel depressed, that she could not fix him and did not want to try. Carter recounted this without emotion, as though describing something that had happened to someone else. Gloria asked if he was upset. He said he was not surprised. She asked if he wanted to talk about it. He said no. After the breakup, Carter became more withdrawn. He stopped leaving the apartment except when necessary. He stopped eating regular meals. Gloria found food she had left for him untouched in the refrigerator. She asked if he was eating at all. He said he ate when he was hungry. She said he looked thinner. He said he was fine. She knew he was not fine, but did not know how to force help on someone who refused it. In June, she scheduled an appointment with a new psychiatrist, someone who had been recommended by a friend whose son had also struggled with depression. Gloria told Carter about the appointment. He said he did not want to go. She said he needed to go. He said therapy had never helped before and would not help now. She said he had to try. He agreed to go because arguing required more energy than complying. The psychiatrist met with Carter for an hour. Afterward, he spoke with Gloria privately. He said Carter was severely depressed, that he exhibited signs of what might be dissociation or detachment from reality. He recommended immediate hospitalization for evaluation and stabilization. Gloria asked if that was necessary. The psychiatrist said Carter was at significant risk, that outpatient treatment was insufficient for someone in his condition. Gloria said she would discuss it with Carter. She did not discuss it with Carter. She could not imagine forcing him into a hospital, could not imagine the battle that would ensue, could not imagine him forgiving her if she had him committed against his will. She told herself the psychiatrist was being overly cautious, that Carter was depressed but not in immediate danger. She told herself she would monitor him closely, that if things worsened, she would take more drastic action. She did not take more drastic action. July came. The apartment grew hot despite air conditioning. Carter stayed in his room with the curtains closed. Gloria went about her schedule, meetings, appearances, charity commitments. She came home each evening and checked on Carter, knocking on his door, waiting for him to acknowledge her. Sometimes he opened the door. Sometimes he said he was sleeping and asked her to leave him alone. She left him alone. On July 22, 1988, Gloria was scheduled to attend a benefit dinner in Midtown. She prepared in the afternoon, hair, makeup, the right dress. Carter was in his room. She knocked on his door before leaving. He opened it slightly. She asked if he was okay. He said yes. She asked if he needed anything. He said no. She told him she would be home by 11. He nodded. She left. The benefit was at a hotel. Gloria sat at a table with people she knew slightly, ate food she did not taste, participated in conversations she would not remember. She left at 10:30, earlier than she had planned. She returned to the apartment at 10:50. The doorman greeted her. She took the elevator to her floor. She unlocked the door and entered. The apartment was silent. She called Carter's name. No response. She walked down the hallway to his room. The door was closed. She knocked. No response. She opened the door. The room was empty. The window was open. She walked to the window and looked out. 14 floors below, on the terrace of a lower apartment, Carter's body lay motionless. She did not scream. She stepped back from the window. She closed the door to Carter's room. She walked to the phone in the kitchen. She called 911. She said her son had fallen from the window. She gave the address. The dispatcher asked if she could see him. She said no. The dispatcher asked her to stay on the line. She said she could not. She hung up. She sat on the couch in the living room. She did not call anyone. She did not go back to Carter's room. She sat in the silence and waited for the police to arrive. They came 20 minutes later. 2 officers, then more, then paramedics who went to the terrace below. An officer asked her questions. When had she last seen Carter? Had he seemed upset? Had he left a note? She answered. She did not remember what she said. They told her Carter was dead. She said she knew. They asked if there was anyone they could call. She said her son Anderson was at school. They asked for his number. She gave it to them. They asked if she wanted to sit down. She said she was already sitting. They asked if she had anyone who could stay with her. She said no. Anderson arrived the next morning, having driven through the night from New Haven. He entered the apartment and found Gloria sitting in the same place she had been sitting when the police left. He sat next to her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Anderson asked what had happened. Gloria said Carter had jumped from his bedroom window. Anderson asked if she had seen it. She said no. Anderson asked if Carter had left a note. She said the police had not found one. The funeral was held a week later. Gloria had arranged everything, the service, the burial, the gathering afterward at her apartment. Carter was buried next to Wyatt Cooper in a cemetery outside the city. The service was small. Anderson attended. Leopold and Christopher came, stood in the back, left immediately after. Gloria's mother came, frail at 87, leaning on a cane. She sat next to Gloria, but said nothing. After the burial, people came to the apartment. They brought food. They said they were sorry. They did not stay long. In the weeks after Carter's death, reporters called asking for statements. Gloria's publicist issued a brief response expressing grief and requesting privacy. The story appeared in newspapers. Vanderbilt heir dies in fall from mother's apartment. Some articles mentioned his age, his struggles, the family history. Others focused on Gloria, on another tragedy in a life marked by them. Gloria did not read the articles. She asked her assistant to collect them and file them away. Anderson returned to Yale. He called weekly. Brief conversations where he asked if she was okay, and she said yes. He did not believe her, but did not push. He had his own grief to manage. In October, he came home for a weekend. He and Gloria sat in the living room, the same room where she had sat the night Carter died. Anderson said he blamed himself for not being there, for not seeing how bad things had gotten. Gloria said it was not his fault. Anderson said it felt like it was. Gloria said she felt the same way. They did not discuss whether Carter's death had been suicide or accident. The window had been open. Carter had gone through it. Whether he had jumped or fallen, whether the decision had been deliberate or impulsive, would never be known. Gloria preferred to think it had been an accident, that Carter had been sitting by the window and had lost his balance. Anderson thought it had been suicide, that Carter had finally done what he had been moving toward for years. Neither of them said this to the other. Gloria closed Carter's room. She did not empty it or redecorate it. She simply closed the door and did not open it again. The room remained as it had been the night he died. Unmade bed, clothes on the floor, books stacked on the desk. It became a sealed space, preserved not out of reverence, but because Gloria could not bring herself to touch anything that had been his. After Carter's death, Gloria began writing, not privately, not in journals hidden in drawers, but for publication. She wrote a memoir about Carter, about his life and death, about her failure to save him. The book was published in 1996, 8 years after he died. It was called A Mother's Story. In it, she described his childhood, his depression, the night he died. She wrote about her guilt, about the questions she could not answer, about the ways she had tried and failed to help him. The book was reviewed in major newspapers. Some critics called it brave, others called it exploitative, a mother profiting from her son's death. Gloria did not respond to the criticism. She appeared on television programs to discuss the book, sitting in chairs across from hosts who asked gentle questions about grief and loss. She answered with practiced composure, her voice steady, her face arranged in expressions that suggested sadness without collapse. She said she had written the book to help other parents understand depression, to reduce stigma, to honor Carter's memory. She did not say she had written it because creating a narrative gave her something to do with the unbearable weight of his absence. The book sold well. It appeared on bestseller lists. Readers wrote letters telling Gloria they had experienced similar losses, that her words had helped them feel less alone. Gloria read some of the letters. They made her feel worse, not better. The readers believed she had processed her grief, that writing the book had provided closure. She had not processed anything. The grief remained, unchanged by its documentation. She wrote more books, a memoir about her childhood, published in 1985 before Carter's death. Another memoir in 2004 covering different territory. Her marriages, her career, her relationships with her sons. Each book revisited the same material from slightly different angles, as though repetition might eventually produce understanding. She appeared at bookstores for readings and signings. People lined up to meet her, to have their copies inscribed, to tell her briefly that they admired her strength. She signed books until her hand cramped, smiled until her face ached, thanked people for coming. She also painted more prolifically. The studio in her apartment became a space she occupied daily. She worked on large canvases, abstracts with bold colors, and aggressive brushwork. The paintings were not technically sophisticated, but they had energy, a kind of urgent expression that felt genuine. She began exhibiting them in galleries, small shows that attracted attention, primarily because of her name. Critics were polite, but not enthusiastic. The paintings were described as sincere and personal, language that suggested they were interesting as autobiography, but not as art. Gloria did not care about the critical response. She painted because the activity filled time, because moving paint across canvas was something she could control when everything else felt uncontrollable. She produced dozens of paintings each year. Some she kept, hanging them in her apartment, where they crowded the walls. Others she gave to friends or donated to charity auctions. A few sold to collectors who wanted them not for aesthetic reasons, but because they were made by Gloria Vanderbilt, because ownership connected them to her story. In the late 1990s, she began appearing regularly on television, not just as a guest promoting books or discussing her life, but as a personality, someone producers invited because her presence generated interest. She appeared on talk shows, morning programs, cable news segments about culture and fashion. She was always well-dressed, always articulate, always willing to discuss her tragedies in ways that were detailed enough to be compelling, but controlled enough to avoid making viewers uncomfortable. The television appearances became another form of documentation. Each interview added to the archive of Gloria Vanderbilt, the public version that existed in media. The archive contained certain facts, the custody trial, the marriages, Carter's death, but arranged them into narrative that suggested resilience and survival. The archive omitted other facts, the ones that did not fit the narrative of a woman who had overcome difficulties and built a meaningful life. It omitted the emptiness, the persistent sense that nothing she did actually mattered, the hours spent alone in her apartment wondering why she continued. She also designed more products. The jeans had been followed by other clothing lines, home goods, fragrances. By the 2000s, her name appeared on products in nearly every category. The licensing deals continued generating income long after the initial success of the jeans had faded. She was not involved in the design process for most products. Companies paid for her name and signature. She approved prototypes in brief meetings and collected royalties. The products existed as extensions of the brand that had little to do with her, except as source material. Anderson had become a journalist, working for CNN as a correspondent, and eventually as a host. He traveled frequently, covering wars and disasters, reporting from locations where violence and crisis were ongoing. Gloria watched him on television, proud but also confused about why he chose work that placed him in danger. She asked him once why he did it. He said he wanted to bear witness, to report on things that mattered. She asked if it was worth the risk. He said he did not know, but he kept doing it anyway. Anderson visited her regularly, stopping by the apartment between assignments. They had dinner, talked about his work and her projects, avoided discussing Carter except in the most oblique references. Anderson was the only one of her 4 sons who maintained consistent contact. Leopold and Christopher called on holidays, sent brief emails, declined invitations to visit. Anderson showed up. He sat in her living room, ate the food she ordered, asked how she was doing. She lied and said she was fine. He knew she was lying, but did not challenge her. In 2011, Anderson came out publicly as gay. He wrote about it in an email to Andrew Sullivan, which Sullivan published. Gloria had known for years but had never discussed it directly with Anderson. After the email was published, she called him and said she was proud of him. He thanked her. She asked if it had been difficult to make the decision to be public. He said it had been easier than staying silent. She understood what he meant without asking him to elaborate. She continued creating books, paintings, appearances. The creation was constant, compulsive. She could not stop documenting herself, could not stop producing evidence that she existed and that her existence meant something. Each book was another attempt to explain her life. Each painting was another attempt to express what could not be said in words. Each television appearance was another chance to control the narrative, to present herself as she wanted to be seen, rather than as she feared she actually was. But the documentation produced its own problem. The more she created, the more the archive replaced the actual person. People knew Gloria Vanderbilt through the books she had written, the paintings she had made, the interviews she had given. They knew the curated version, the narrative that had been shaped and refined through repetition. They did not know the woman who returned to her apartment after appearances and sat alone in rooms filled with objects, wondering what any of it had been for. She collected her own press clippings, storing them in boxes organized by decade. She kept copies of every book she had written, every catalog from exhibitions of her paintings, every photograph of her that had appeared in magazines. The collection was comprehensive, an archive of her public life maintained with the same care museums used to preserve artifacts. She looked through the boxes occasionally, reading articles written about her decades earlier, looking at photographs of herself at different ages. She tried to recognize the person in the images as herself, but often could not. In her 80s, she became even more prolific. She wrote another memoir. She painted larger canvases. She gave more interviews. The activity accelerated rather than slowed. She was aware she was running out of time, that the opportunity to document herself was finite. She worked faster, produced more, filled more space with evidence of her existence. She told interviewers she was doing it because she loved creating, because art gave her life meaning. She did not say she was doing it because stopping would mean confronting the question of what remained when the creating ended. The archive grew. Books on shelves, paintings on walls, files of press clippings, recordings of television appearances. The documentation was exhaustive. It proved she had lived, that she had created things, that she had been seen and recognized. It proved nothing about whether the life had been worth living, whether the recognition had provided what she needed, whether any of it had filled the emptiness that had existed since childhood. Gloria Vanderbilt died on June 17, 2019, at her home in Manhattan. She was 95 years old. Anderson was with her. She had been in declining health for months, moving less, eating little, sleeping most of the day. The end, when it came, was quiet. She stopped breathing in the early morning. Anderson called the funeral home. He called his half-brothers. He sat in the apartment for several hours before beginning the process of what came next. The funeral was private, attended by fewer than 20 people. Gloria was buried next to Wyatt Cooper and Carter. Anderson gave no eulogy. He stood at the gravesite and said nothing. Leopold and Christopher attended but did not speak to Anderson beyond brief acknowledgments. After the burial, there was no gathering, no reception. People dispersed. Anderson returned to the apartment alone. The apartment had to be emptied. Decades of accumulation, furniture, art, books, objects collected from around the world filled every room. Anderson walked through the space, opening closets and drawers, finding things he had never seen before. Boxes of photographs, letters from people whose names he did not recognize, sketches and unfinished paintings, clothing from decades earlier, still wrapped in plastic from dry cleaners. The volume was overwhelming. He hired an estate sale company. They inventoried everything, assessing value, sorting items into categories. Much of what they found was valuable: original artworks, designer furniture, jewelry, rare books. But much of it was simply stuff: mass-produced decorative items, old magazines, souvenirs from trips that had meant nothing. The valuable and the worthless existed side by side, indistinguishable in the way they had occupied Gloria's space. Sotheby's agreed to auction the significant pieces. The auction was scheduled for October 2019. The catalog was produced over the summer, a thick volume with color photographs of items arranged in lots: furniture, paintings, jewelry, decorative objects. Each lot included a description and an estimated value. The catalog was titled "The Collection of Gloria Vanderbilt." It was mailed to collectors, to people who followed estate sales, to anyone interested in purchasing pieces of a life. Anderson looked through the catalog once. He saw objects he remembered from childhood: a particular lamp, a table where they had eaten dinner, paintings that had hung in various apartments. He saw other objects he had never noticed, things that had been present but invisible, part of the background of Gloria's carefully curated spaces. The catalog made everything look significant, as though each object had been chosen with intention and held meaning. Anderson knew many of the objects had been purchased impulsively, collected without purpose, kept because discarding them required decisions Gloria had not wanted to make. The auction took place over 2 days. Collectors attended in person, others bid by phone or online. The lots sold methodically: a Regency-style bookcase, estimated at $3,000 to $5,000, sold for $12,000. A pair of Chinese porcelain garden seats, estimated at $2,000 to $4,000, sold for $8,000. Gloria's own paintings, the abstracts she had produced over decades, sold for modest amounts: $3,000, $5,000, occasionally $8,000. The buyers were not purchasing art. They were purchasing pieces of Gloria Vanderbilt's life, objects they could own and display and tell stories about. The jewelry generated the highest prices. A Cartier brooch she had worn frequently sold for $30,000. A diamond bracelet Wyatt Cooper had given her sold for $50,000. The buyers for these items were collectors who wanted pieces with provenance, who valued the connection to Gloria Vanderbilt more than the objects themselves. The jewelry would be worn by other people, people Gloria had never met, people who knew her only through the public narrative. Not everything sold. Some lots failed to meet their reserve prices. These items were returned to Anderson or sent to secondary auctions or donated to charity. A set of chairs no one wanted, books that were not rare enough to interest collectors, paintings that even at low estimates could not find buyers. The unsold items revealed what the market valued and what it did not. Gloria's life, reduced to lots in a catalog, could be sorted into desirable and unwanted, into things worth paying for and things worth nothing. Anderson kept very little: a few photographs, some of Wyatt Cooper's papers, a painting of Gloria's that he remembered from childhood. He did not want most of it. The objects felt like evidence of accumulation rather than life, things his mother had collected to fill space and prove something that could not be proved through objects. He arranged for the remaining items to be donated or discarded. The apartment was emptied over several weeks. Furniture was removed. Walls were stripped of paintings. Closets were cleared of clothes and boxes. Once the apartment was empty, Anderson decided to sell it. He listed it in November 2019. The listing described it as a classic Manhattan residence with views and pre-war details. It did not mention Gloria Vanderbilt, though potential buyers knew. The apartment sold within a month to a buyer who planned to renovate, to erase whatever remained of the previous occupant and create something new. Anderson signed the papers. He took the money and added it to his own accounts. He did not need it. He had his own career, his own income. But the money existed, so he kept it. The estate included other properties. The Southampton house had been sold years earlier. The Catskills property had been disposed of in the 1990s. But there were financial accounts, investments, royalties from licensing deals that continued generating income even after Gloria's death. Anderson inherited it all. Leopold and Christopher had been provided for in earlier settlements and were not mentioned in the final will. Anderson became the sole heir to what remained of Gloria Vanderbilt's accumulated wealth. He announced publicly that he would not leave the inheritance to his own children if he had any. He said he did not believe in inheriting money, that it had not done his family any good, that wealth passed down created more problems than it solved. The statement generated attention. Some people praised him for rejecting dynastic wealth. Others said it was easy to reject money after benefiting from it, that his position at CNN and his success in journalism had been enabled by the connections and opportunities his name provided. Anderson did not argue. He said what he believed and moved forward. He continued working, traveling to conflict zones, reporting on disasters. He appeared on television nightly, his face serious, his voice controlled. He looked like Gloria, the same bone structure, the same intensity around the eyes. But he carried himself differently. He did not perform the way she had performed. He did not seem to need constant documentation of his existence. He simply did his work and went home. The objects from Gloria's estate scattered. The furniture ended up in apartments and houses across the country, owned by people who never knew her. The jewelry was worn by women who purchased it at auction or received it as gifts. The paintings hung on walls in homes where her name was a curiosity. A small piece of cultural history represented by abstract shapes in bold colors. The objects that had surrounded her, that had filled the spaces she occupied, existed now without her, owned by strangers, present in contexts she could never have imagined. Nothing was preserved as a collection. There was no Gloria Vanderbilt museum, no archive where her belongings were maintained as a historical record. The dispersion was complete. What she had accumulated over 9 decades was distributed, absorbed into the market, repurposed. The objects that had meant something to her, or that she had collected because she thought they should mean something, meant nothing in particular to their new owners. They were simply things, decorative or useful or valuable, disconnected from the life that had collected them. Anderson received letters from people who had purchased items at the auction. They wrote to tell him they treasured what they had bought, that they felt honored to own something that had belonged to Gloria Vanderbilt. They asked if he could tell them stories about specific objects, about when Gloria had acquired them or why she had kept them. Anderson did not respond to most of the letters. He did not have stories to tell. His mother had owned many things, but she had not spoken about them in ways that created narrative. The objects had simply been there, accumulating. The estate was settled by early 2020. The apartment was sold, the objects were dispersed, the accounts were closed or transferred. What remained was paperwork, legal documents, financial records, inventories of what had been owned and what had been sold. Anderson filed the papers in boxes and stored them in a closet. He did not look at them again. The administration of Gloria Vanderbilt's estate was complete. The life had been converted into transactions, into monetary values and legal transfers. What could be sold had been sold. What could not be sold had been discarded. Gloria Vanderbilt was born into a fortune that was already diminishing, raised by people who saw her as an obligation, fought over in a courtroom when she was 10 years old. She spent 9 decades trying to solve problems that money was supposed to have already solved: belonging, safety, being seen as something other than a name. She married 4 times, seeking in each husband a different version of escape or stability. She built a commercial empire by lending her name to products, becoming a brand that outlasted most of what she actually created. She had 4 sons, 2 of whom she barely knew, one of whom died by falling from her apartment window, one of whom survived her and refused the inheritance. The accumulation was immense: properties she barely occupied, objects she collected without clear purpose, paintings she made compulsively, books she wrote repeatedly, each one covering the same terrain from slightly different angles, television appearances where she performed a version of herself that was articulate and composed and bore limited resemblance to the person who returned home afterward. The documentation was exhaustive. The archive was comprehensive. The evidence of her existence filled rooms, galleries, catalogs, databases. What the wealth bought was visibility. She was photographed, interviewed, discussed, recognized. Her face appeared on billboards and in magazines. Her name was embroidered on millions of back pockets. People knew who she was, or thought they did. They knew the narrative that had been constructed, the poor little rich girl who became a successful businesswoman, who survived tragedies and continued creating. The narrative was not false exactly, but it was incomplete. It left out the silence, the isolation that persisted despite being constantly surrounded, the sense that performing a life was not the same as living one. What the wealth failed to buy was simpler, connection that felt genuine rather than transactional, acceptance into spaces that remained closed regardless of how much money she spent or how carefully she presented herself, the ability to protect her children from inheriting her damage along with her fortune, peace with the fact that she had been used by her mother, by her aunt, by husbands who had their own reasons for marrying her, by a system that saw her primarily as an asset to be managed and monetized. The houses were sold or emptied. The objects were auctioned or donated or discarded. The son who survived her gave interviews about not believing in inherited wealth, about the damage it had caused his family. The brand continued generating royalties even after her death, her name still appearing on products, still selling the idea that luxury could be purchased in affordable increments. The image persisted while the person disappeared. There is no clear moral to extract from this. Gloria Vanderbilt was not a villain who deserved what happened to her, but neither was she a hero who transcended her circumstances through resilience and creativity. She was someone who inherited wealth and damage in equal measure, who spent her life trying to use one to solve the other, who never quite succeeded. She created abundantly and remained empty. She was seen constantly and felt invisible. She accumulated everything available for purchase and discovered that what she actually needed was not for sale. The questions that remain are not about whether she made the right choices or whether her life was wasted. The questions are about what happens when the fundamental promise that wealth provides freedom, security, the ability to construct a life according to one's own design proves false. What happens when you have access to everything except what would make the access meaningful? What happens when the project of being Gloria Vanderbilt, of maintaining the image and the brand and the carefully curated spaces, consumes the person it was supposed to protect? She died at 95 in an apartment filled with objects she had collected. Her son was present, the objects were dispersed, the estate was settled. What remained was a name that continued appearing on products, an archive of interviews and paintings and books, a Wikipedia page that summarized her life in sections: early life, marriages, career, personal life, death. The summary was accurate in its facts and insufficient in every other way.